Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is indeed my show. As you guys can see, I have a new setup. This morning, things look a little bit strange, or at the very least, not necessarily the same as they were at the other location. But I am here. I'm going to be here for at least a month. I'm back home, back in my hometown, Richmond, VA, Richmond, Virginia. So yeah, that's a little bit strange, being back home, but it feels normal, if that makes sense. It feels normal. It feels like I'm typically here. In fact, I am a few blocks from where I had my flash mob wedding proposal to my ex-wife. It's a place called Station 2. It's this great burger joint, fantastic hamburger joint. I would say probably the best in Richmond. And we go. She thinks we're just there for lunch or for dinner at the time. And what she doesn't know is that behind her is all of these people from my job, family members. I don't know if I had any of her family members that were there or not, but we even had this group called the Bearded League of Virginia that was just so happened to be there. And so at the point where the bell hits, I think I want to marry you goes off with, I can't think of the guy's name. He does a really good Michael Jackson impression. And everybody in the restaurant gets up, starts dancing. And she's sitting there with a French fry, eating it, looking around like, what the hell is happening? It's very surreal if you've ever been in the flash mob, because everybody's like freaking out. And this one person just sitting there like the normality has just been fundamentally destroyed, in which case you have, this surreal moment. But no, back home in Richmond. So there is that. I hope you guys are doing great this morning. This beginning of the year, we're going into the first real week of the year because last week was kind of divided. And I hope you guys have had a good one up to this point and so far. Can you guys hear me all right? No weirdness with the sound or anything like that? Good. Everything's great. I had a little bit of difficulty getting my setup straight this morning. I'm going to have to add something to this because I don't necessarily have my secondary TV. So if there are anomalies, bear with me. This is just kind of getting everything started at this new location. I have a damn good show for you today, a full show for you today. For starting off this morning, I'm going to have Dr. Hassan Unal. He is a professor of political science in Ankara, because I want to get into what is taking place on the ground in Syria, especially from this kind of Turkish point of view. Because, all things being equal, Turkey has a huge amount of influence in the activities of Syria for obvious reasons. But they were instrumental in knocking over the government and backing the jihadists that took over that territory. So there's that. But also, just in relation to what does this mean for Iran? What does this mean for the larger Middle East in and of itself? Right now, Channel 14, I guess yesterday, played this argument by Netanyahu that Egypt was breaking peace treaty rules. Now, ignore the fact for the moment that Israel invaded what is it called? The quarter. It'll come to me in a moment. Philadelphia quarter. Put that to the side for the moment, meaning Israel itself is breaking the Camp David agreements. But now Israel is arguing that because Egypt is militarizing their own territory, that Egypt somehow doesn't have a right to defend itself from the jihadists that were just put in to Syria, that they're concerned may invade. Or for that matter, I would imagine even Israel at this point, you can't really trust them either. So that is a pretty wild argument. Basically, the Middle East is being reshaped based upon what has taken place in Syria as these forces kind of jockey into position. Not to mention Syria itself is not necessarily a stable factor at this point. It seems like it could collapse or fall apart. So there is that. We also have Professor Malouf. He's going to join us at 9 o'clock. Ukraine has launched a counterattack. And the counterattack That's utterly failed right off the bat. They apparently even tried to attack Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. That didn't work either. They are basically doubling down on failure. And yet they continue nonetheless. I don't think you realize how depraved this is. For all intents and purposes, they fully understand that they've lost this conflict. And even the peace deal or the peace treaty, what do you call it? Freedom deal or whatever the hell Zelensky was calling it. Even that makes it clear that they require NATO, meaning the world needs to end for Zelensky to have any chance of trying to even keep balance, let alone win it. But I think what they understand is Joe Biden was trying to fill them with weapons at the very end, this idea of a offensive, with this idea that anything that you could take, if you could hold on to it, if you can get into a peace agreement, you can use that territory and Kursk to negotiate and trade. Well, Russia's already said that's not going to happen. They're not going to make any agreements or trades in regards to Russian territory. And for all intents and purposes, it's pretty astonishing that Ukraine, after being beat down in the way it's being beat down, that it continues to launch these offensives, continue to put good people after bad, even to the point of now bringing in kids into the conflict. So there is that. But I hear a beep that typically means my guest is here, and I'm going to go to my guest. There we are. We are joined with Dr. Hassan Unal. He's professor of political science and international relations at Başkent University in Ankara, Turkey. Professor, welcome to the show. How are you doing this morning? Well, it's this evening for you.
Well, thank you. It's afternoon, but
Yeah.
Let's call it morning. Good morning. Yes.
No worries at all. I always get in trouble doing that. It's like I'm
not,
forcing
yes,
people into my
nice to be in
Western.
your program. Yes, in your program.
Thank you, man. I appreciate you joining me. I want to jump into Syria because the events that have been taking place in Syria have been just fascinating. And frankly, kind of a geopolitical earthquake in the Middle East. Give me your take on how Syria fell. Let's start there. How did it collapse, especially collapse so quickly? Because I don't think anybody, at least I didn't see it, or anybody that I've spoken to, nobody saw that coming at the speed and rapidity in which it collapsed. From your point of view, why did it collapse so quickly?
Well, other than the general view that Syria had been devastated as a result of the war because of the ruining sanctions by the United States and lots of other problems that the Bashar al-Assad regime actually had to face up to. I have no other explanation because none of us actually following the events down here in Turkey or my friends and colleagues in Russia and Iran. Nobody else. I mean, nobody apparently ever expected the overthrow of the regime. Actually, the regime wasn't overthrown by anybody. It just melted down. And why and how it melted down, I suppose I mean, we are going to have to wait and do research to why and how it quickly melted down as it did. Nobody expected it at such a speed. Indeed, when President Putin actually made an assessment of what happened in Syria, he was basically saying just a few hundred HTS militants basically surrounded one of the biggest cities in Syria, that is Aleppo, and the whole Aleppo with its defenders, surrendered to some 300 people equipped with pickups and light weapons and what have you.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you this. So Jelani at this point is trying to form a government, and what as he calls it. There are many different groups in Syria that he's now trying to disarm, the Kurds being one of the many groups that are basically there in the territory itself. Do you think he's going to be able to maintain this? I mean, do you think HTS is really going to be able to maintain Syria as a cohesive unit? Or do you expect it to break down? I mean, Israel has taken parts of it. HTS, of course, has taken parts of it. The US is in parts of it with the Kurdish forces. Do you think this is going to break down, especially along sectarian lines?
Well, it may go, in the direction of unity and disarmament of all those groups and gangs and what have you, and then Syria might actually enjoy some sort of not only unity but also economic development and what have you, or it could go the other way as well, the other way quite easily, in the sense that the society basically, there are lots of groups and peoples who don't trust each other. First of all, who would actually trust an HTS and its leader, who had chopped off lots of heads and tortured people to death, as he was part of Al Qaeda in Iraq, and as he continued, and someone who continued with the same attitude and with the same approach is jihadist, battling jihadist war and all that in Syria. Now he says he's changed on the one hand when he talks to the Turkish officials and others, but at the same time you would see that the people he appoints to his interim cabinet are the same people who applied strict Sharia rules when they were in control of the Idlib province in the northwest of the country, bordering Turkey. So, and if this is what he's going to basically apply to the whole of Syria, it wouldn't augur well, I would say, because under such circumstances, large sections of the Syrian population would certainly resist in various ways, including armed conflicts and whatever, armed resistance. The other thing is, now he recently said that it would take about 3-4 years for the interim government to prepare the constitution and to basically hold the multi-party elections one way or the other. Now, the question is, why would it take so long to prepare a new constitution? After all the Syrians are, more than 90% are Arabs, and a nation state, quite secular, a unitary administration, which is what the Syrian constitution is about, would basically offer the people, all the Syrian people, what they expect. Why would they not simply work on it and then produce a new, having made certain amendments to the constitution, then bringing it up for referendum by the people and all that? And why should it take so long? Because if it is gonna take long, it would then mean that it may actually increase the misgivings across the country among various sections of the people. And there's also the international dimension to that. There's Israel, which is ready to basically stir up trouble in one way or the other. It is already bombed every part of Syria, citing reasons that they were actually bombing the ammunition depots and storage facilities here and there, all the weapons, and anything belonging to the Syrian armed forces.
Right.
And the second thing, they have invaded and occupied large chunks of Syrian territory to the south of Syria. According to reports, they are just about 15 to 20 kilometers to the capital, Damascus. Although the new government keeps saying that they are quite friendly and they are going to be friendly to Israel, and they are not going to let anybody use any part of Syrian territory to launch attacks on Syria. They keep saying that. It may reach a point where, even Israel could actually incite ethnic and or religious or sectarian trouble across the country. And then if it takes such a long time to prepare a constitution, then you would expect anything to come out of it. So basically, the situation is fraught with dangers. And how are the other countries going to basically approach to the developing situation in Syria is another question. Whether the United States is going to be helpful to the new administration by lifting the sanctions and offering financial and economic assistance in one way or the other, and the international organizations are going to again come round with financial assistance and what have you, or the other way around, you leave it to its own devices to sort out its own problems. Then you would be talking about a kind of Middle East and Afghanistan, if you like, okay, with neighboring countries taking sides in a new round of civil war that would be quite likely to break out. So, in many respects, I would say that the new situation is not going to be easier for the people of Syria than the previous administration.
How do you make a very good point, where Jelani is making this argument that he wants to reunify Syria, basically now that it's broken, to bring it all back together again. But Israel has been conducting airstrikes on Damascus. I mean, at this point, they're like nearly 1,000 airstrikes that they've done on Syria to destroy any remaining, let's say, armaments that the Syrian government had before it collapsed. How do you explain what seems to be coordination between Israel and between this new Jelani state, or HTS state of Syria? How do you explain the coordination between these two groups? Why doesn't, for whatever reason, he gives them a complete pass? I mean, anytime Israel is brought up, he would say, we're going to have friendly relations, we're going to have friendly relations, despite the fact that Israel has stolen and occupied large parts of Syrian territory, as you pointed out, a few miles from Damascus. How do you explain this coordination between these two groups?
Well, it's difficult to explain it, but as you said, actually, it's a new type of Islamism, if you like, and jihadism. And I would say the biggest loser out of this situation is Iran, and the biggest winner is Israel. Can you imagine? Israel basically was at war with Syria since its establishment in 1948, regardless of whichever government was in power in Damascus. Early on, from its independence in 1946, there were various other governments or governments that came that took over through military coups, until the Ba'ath coup of 1963. But, Syria and Israel fought in 1948, in 1956 as part of the Suez Crisis. no, in 1956 maybe not so much, but certainly 1967 when Israel attacked its neighbors, three neighbors, and quadrupled its territories in 6 days. Syria was one of the sufferers. And in 1973, Syria was the main players in the Yom Kippur War, together with Egypt, against Israel. In the first week or so of that war, they pushed Israel out of all the occupied territories. And since then, Syria resisted all the calls for a reconciliation, for peace and reconciliation with Israel, until and unless Israel returns all the Golan Heights and what have you. So Syria always remained on what we call the steadfast countries against Israel, if you like. And now, overnight, if you like, Syria becomes the best friend of Israel, without Israel firing one single bullet. So this is the biggest gain Israel has made. And Iranians have lost enormously. Supposedly Turkey has won, but I would very much doubt that Turkey has ever won. And I would even say that Turkey is going to become, Syria is going to become more and more problematic for Turkey in the weeks and months and possibly years to come.
Well, I'm glad you say that, because Turkey was going to be the next country I went to in this. Because as you point out, a large number of people said that Turkey has won in this, because they said Turkey, the United States, and Israel were both working in coordination with the jihadists in order to accomplish this kind of takeover of the Syrian government. From your point of view, Israel outed, or at the very least said, and I want to get your take on it, that Turkey was working in coordination with Israel and the jihadists as they took over Syria. Do you give any credence to those reports from Israel?
Well, I will take it with a pinch of salt, given that the Turkish government has been very, very critical of Israel at the same time. So Turkey has been one of the most vociferous critiques of Israel's genocide, Israel committing a genocide in Gaza, for instance.
Right.
And the Turkish government has been up and about against Israel here and there. But you can also say at the same time, for instance, about 9 days before this HTS militants went out of their cage, if you like, in Idlib, with the clear intention of capturing Aleppo and all that, the Israeli intelligence chief visited Turkey. So how would you explain that?
Right.
Okay. Yes. Did they simply decide to go over to Ankara for a cup of Turkish tea or a Turkish coffee? Well, certainly not. They discussed lots of things. Plus, I would also say that, for instance, there wasn't much coverage by the Turkish media on that, although the Turkish official press, Anadolu Agency, covered it, but it only gave a coverage about, Turkey and Israel talking about this and that in Hamas-related affairs and a ceasefire in Gaza and what have you. So there may have been some coordination. So if one day a certain degree of convincing evidence comes up pointing to the fact that Turkey and Israel coordinated these efforts, I wouldn't be surprised. But now, without, in the absence of any evidence of that sort, I would say what Turkey did was that Turkey basically offered an enormous gift to Israel on a golden plate. So Turkey basically offered the whole of Syria to Israel in the sense that, Syria is not going to be anti-Israeli anymore.
Right.
So I would say there is this. Okay, so whether you have coordinated it with Israel, with the United States or not, isn't that much important. Plus, I would also say Idlib is so close to Turkey, and these guys basically made Idlib into their terrorist hub in those years, thanks to Turkey. I mean, without Turkey, the Russians, the Iranians, and the Syrians would have just crushed them.
Right.
They would have crushed them out of Syria altogether. And they remained there as part of a deal, Turkey strenuously, and how shall I say, even to the point of breaking its relations with Russia, with Iranians and others. These guys basically were allowed to remain in Idlib. So there is all this, you can, what I say, supporting evidence that even without the actual coordination of these efforts, Turkey has certainly helped Israel enormously. Whether the Israelis appreciate it or not, there is also that point.
Yeah, well, there's that part too, right? You pointed out that this may not necessarily be good for Turkey in the long run. Why not? Well, why do you think this may be to Turkey's detriment in the long run?
Well, first of all, if Syria were to break up through a civil war along religious, sectarian, and also ethnic lines, that would lead to the creation of a puppet state to the east of the Euphrates by the PKK and its affiliates in Syria. And basically, this was something Turkey was more concerned about than anything else in Syria. And now Turkey expects the HTS, for instance, to be tough with these PKK and blah, blah. But HTS, A, cannot do much about that. B, whether Israel and the United States would let HTS do anything against the PKK, PYD to the east of Euphrates is another question. Turkey basically has aggravated its own problem through its own action. And if the country were to break up into pieces, then you would have more refugees coming into Turkey, and Turkey would, meanwhile, presumably spend lots of money. It has already, spent tens of billions of, if not hundreds of billions of dollars on the Syrian war because of its support for the Syrian refugees, because of its loss of trade and economic relations with Syria, because the Syrian war has put so much strains on Turkey's exports to the Middle East, and blah, blah. I mean, prior to the war, Turkey-Syria relations were just excellent, so friendly and almost brotherly. Why did Turkey get involved in this dirty business of the United States and Israel is another question. So what I'm saying is there is a bunch of problems actually that might arise out of the new situation, and the Turkish government would be in a very difficult situation to deal with.
Thank you for that, because a lot of the people who are giving commentary are only looking at it from this angle of, well, this is great for Turkey. Turkey is a major winner in this. And so I do appreciate the perspective that this is not, there are long-term consequences for Turkey that may not necessarily have aired yet, especially considering we don't necessarily know whether the Syrian government is going to be able to maintain itself now or not. That's I definitely appreciate the point of view.
Even in the short term.
Oh, even in the short term, right? Because this is fluid, and we don't know how this is going to turn out. I want to move to Gaza for a bit. Where does that stand currently? I mean, because it seems like with the collapse of Syria, Gaza has been isolated, that much more so. For that matter, Gaza and the West Bank seems to have been isolated, with Israel at this point seemingly can do whatever it wants without any pushback from the rest of the world, especially now that this kind of the Hezbollah Syria axis has been crushed. Give me a take on where Gaza stands currently, or for that matter, even the West Bank.
Well, I don't really know what I would say positively in favor, that anything would actually impact positively on Gaza and the West Bank.
Right.
The other thing is, as I said, Iran is the biggest loser in Syria. And because Syria was always the link between Iran and Hezbollah. Hezbollah is presumably the only military organization that actually defied Israel and forced Israel to retreat in every battle it was involved in. In 2006, it was like that. Previously, Hezbollah had always basically forced Israel to retreat after it attacked Hezbollah. Hezbollah won the latest war in October, November. To my understanding, Hezbollah basically didn't let Israel invade and occupy 1 inch of Lebanese territory. There's no question about that. And for the first time, Hezbollah managed to basically bomb every part of Israel, including capital Tel Aviv, with its stocks of missiles and what have you. So, but this is certainly a big blow in two senses. One is that logistically, it is going to be quite, it is not going to be as easy in the past for Iran to supply Hezbollah. This is one thing. And the second thing is the government in Damascus. Now, the government in Damascus says that they have no animosity to Israel, to the United States, to any Western country, or to any country in the region except Iran and Hezbollah, they say. And they are going to crush Hezbollah, or they are going to help crush Hezbollah with whatever means at their disposal. So it is going to. So Hezbollah and Iran will have to formulate new ways of, not only communication but also logistical supply and what have you. But at the same time, this axis of resistance. Now, in the past, for instance, we didn't have this Ansarullah as part of this axis of resistance. Now we have that in the Yemen, and it's a very interesting phenomenon because they have all sorts of missile stocks with which they can hit Israel, and not only Israel, but they are basically defying the United States and the Western Armada in the Red Sea. Interestingly. So there's all that. So we are going to wait to see how this situation basically reshapes itself. So it's not going to. I mean, Hezbollah will have to find a way of survival. Otherwise, I mean, I wouldn't expect Hezbollah to be crushed so easily. The other thing is. To what degree would Israel meddle in the internal affairs of Syria? To the degree of inciting a civil war? And if they do, what would be the ultimate aim of Israel, for instance, and or the United States? So these are all the questions basically we'll have to wait to try to answer.
No, I agree with you. It's complicated. I mean, the situation was already complicated. It's gotten that much more fraught and complicated, especially for the regional players. There seems to be, whether it's Iraq, Iran, Russia, Turkey, all of these groups are seeming to try to get influence into the new Syrian government. How do you think that looks so far? Meaning, I've seen Iraq go and have these conversations with the Syrian government. I've seen Turkey send its foreign minister into Syria. All of these groups are trying to, I guess, gain favor and influence. How do you think that's going to work out? Meaning, which group do you think is going to get the most, let's say, dominant influence in the country up to this point? I mean, that's assuming the country can even stay together.
Well, it also depends on how Trump administration is going to approach Syria. Whether the Trump administration, as Trump has profusely expressed over the last few weeks and so forth, it is going to follow a policy of, I don't have much business in Syria, and
Right.
okay, Assad was a bad guy. Now with him gone, it doesn't mean that we are going to get more involved. If this is going to be the U.S. policy, then the whole thing, the whole Syria business would then be left to Israel to deal with on the part of the Western world. And that is where Israel, it may be easier for Israel and also at the same time difficult for Israel, because after all, as there is no threat perception coming from Syria, for instance, why would you basically try to tear up Syria into pieces, or why would you incite civil wars here and there, or what would you do with it?
Yeah.
So it's going to be an interesting situation to watch. On the Turkish part, again, something similar. What Turkey now expects is that the Gulf Arab countries are going to pour money into Syria for reconstruction and what have you. They are talking about $300 billion as the minimum. Some estimates go up to $600 billion, and some others say even $1 trillion is needed to basically put the country back into some sort of shape. So what Turkey expects, and the present, the incumbent government in Turkey expects, is that there's going to be lots of money poured into Syria, and the Turkish companies are going to go into all these government proper projects to build new airports, to build new blah blah infrastructure and whatever. The Turkish companies are quite good at that. So, but if nobody basically pours in so much money into Syria, then Syria will become a wasteland, which nobody would take any lively interest in. Remember the days the United States was actually pulling out of Afghanistan. There was all this speculation about who is going to gain much influence in Afghanistan, whether it is going to be China or Russia or the United States is going to come back one way or the other through the back door.
Right.
Afghanistan is basically a wasteland now. No one is taking much interest in. So Syria is not going to be perhaps that bad. We never know. But there doesn't appear to be much hope either. I mean, there doesn't appear to be any concrete, how shall I say, hope. That we can say, okay, so there's going to be restructure and there's going to be money coming from Gulf Arab countries, from the United States, from European countries. All of them are going to. Now we have a guy who says who's changed, and who doesn't shake hands with the German foreign minister because she's a woman.
I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, I mean, the woman is taken mickey of. Because she says she tries to say still nice things despite all this, and even the German media basically are making a Mickey out of all that and saying, look, what are you talking about? He hasn't shaken your hand because you are a woman.
I know, right? If you can't even shake the woman's hand, what does it mean for the women in your government? And I guess that means they're not going to be women in that
Apparently,
government.
when they went into the meeting, they talked about women's rights and blah blah extensively.
Well, a right
Well,
in the household.
women's rights were all over the place in Syria under the Ba'ath administration.
Uh-huh.
It was quite secular. Although there was Islamic law in addition to the secular law in Syria before, in terms of secularization of the country, it was much ahead of any other Arab country, perhaps on a par with Egypt.
Right. Well, speaking about Egypt, so Channel 4 has given this kind of, I guess, interview where Netanyahu is saying that Egypt is breaking some kind of peace treaty with Israel because they are militarizing their own territory, effectively saying Egypt doesn't have a right to defend itself. And because it's concerned about, I guess, jihadists invading Egypt, Egypt is starting building up defenses in its own territory. And Netanyahu is saying, well, that is threatening to us that they're doing this in their own territory. You've been surprised that many of the Arab states have allowed Israel to kill as many Arabs and Muslims as they have. I mean, they've committed a genocide against the Palestinians. They've slaughtered many of the Lebanese in these bombing strikes, in these airstrikes. And as you pointed out, with the Syrian government, they're a few miles from Damascus, putting just astonishing bombing rates in the tunes of 500 or more at this point. None of the Arab states have did anything. Many have said something that they didn't particularly like, but none of them have done anything. They've just allowed Israel to go about in the way that they have. Has that surprised you? Because I got to be honest, it surprised me that nobody got involved.
Well, it is difficult to say in the sense because this, Muslim Brotherhood business divided the Arab world. So if you basically talk to the Egyptians, they say with justice, Muslim Hamas is the Palestinian equivalent of the Muslim Brotherhood, and the Muslim Brotherhood is against all the secular governments across the Arab world. It is also the Gulf Arab countries, Saudi Arabia, and United Arab Emirates would say, well, they are also against the Gulf monarchies. Okay, so so they don't basically trust them. There is no trust between them. There is obvious enmity and blah blah. And the Syrian civil war again divided the Arab countries up to a certain point. But the trouble is, over the last few years, the Gulf Arab countries, for instance, poured so much money into this dirty war to topple Bashar Assad and the Ba'ath administration over that. But then they backtrailed from their position, realizing that what is going to come in its place is going to be a jihadist administration of support, and therefore they basically reshaped their policy by which they embraced Syria into the ranks of Arab League and what have you. But then again, when Bashar Assad, he wasn't overthrown. I wouldn't like to use the word, but when he escaped the country, the trouble is none of them could have done anything because it happened just overnight. No one expected it. And now, presumably, they are trying to come up to terms with the newly developing situation. So the Turkish side says, these guys have changed. if you believe that story. Okay, Saudi Arabia would have to buy that story, at least initially. Now, you give these guys some sort of how shall I say, advice and support so that they wouldn't go to the extremes. And from the Saudi point of view, for instance, it wouldn't be bad if they were so anti-Iranian. Okay, because to be anti-Iranian would automatically mean to be Saudi friendly. So in the case of the Egyptians and the others, again, there are all these divides. On the one hand, Egypt is dead against the Muslim Brotherhood and all that. And these guys are, on the one hand, radical Islamists. On the other hand, they are not anti-Israeli. So it's a very complicated situation. When you have all these complications, you would understand why the Arab countries haven't raised their finger when Israel was committing a genocide against the Gazan people. The other thing might well be the Egyptians and the others I've spoken to say that no one expected that Israel would go to those extremes. So this, I mean, how would, in this day and age, a country like even Israel wouldn't go to those extremists? They never expected this. There's all this problem around, and I think everyone is expecting, everyone is waiting for Trump to come up and, formulate his own policy, the Middle East in general, and also to the specific questions like a Palestinian state. What sort of a Palestinian state? Would you basically pacify the situation in West Bank and one way or the other by giving the Palestinians a state? Okay, and also the other Arab countries, for instance, what sort of a policy would the United States, for instance, pursue with regard to Syria? Turkey is very much expecting that to come out, because from the Turkish point of view, there is this PKK BYD business to the side, to the east of the Euphrates, and if nothing comes along, and if the United States continues to back these terrorist groups in that part of Syria, like under the Biden administration, then Turkey will have to take undertake some military operations that might actually strain the Turkish-American relations, but then the Turkish public would condone it. So there are all these questions hanging around. We are going to have to wait to see how those questions are going to be resolved.
Do you think Trump is going to abandon the Kurds in this situation? Because you're right, from the Turkish point of view, the PKK and the YPG are terrorist groups that the United States effectively back in Syria. But HTS has said that they want to make Syria whole, and HTS has shown, let's say, antagonism towards the Kurdish groups. I mean, they've been continuous fighting with those groups. What do you think Trump's policy towards the Kurds are going to be? I mean, Trump has said that he wants to pull out of Syria. By definition, that would mean effectively pulling out military assets that are defending the Kurdish regions. How do you think that's going to unfold? Do you think Trump is going to ultimately pull out?
Well, normally, in normal circumstances, I would expect him to pull out. But there is this Israeli dimension to that. The problem is, if I was the United States and or Israel, I would never try to carve out a Kurdish state of the Middle East, because this would turn Turkey automatically against you. Why would you, how shall I say, why would you turn a friendly country like Turkey with 85 million population, with quite a big economy and quite a lot of influence with, essentially effective military and what have you against you. This doesn't make sense. Okay, so you can't do that, and one day or the other, and one way or the other, it is going to happen, and your relations with Turkey is going to be harmed as a result of this policy. But there are certain groups in the United States that want that, and that I don't understand. Why? Deep state groups, certain lobbyists who want to be on unfriendly terms with Turkey. But then the trouble is, okay, if you do that, then in a multipolar world, first, you are not going to be able to carve out a Kurdish state of the territories of 4 Middle Eastern countries. You are going to push Turkey and Iran together one way or the other, and the central Iraqi government, even the Barzani administration in the north of Turkey, because they are also concerned about rising influence of the PKK-PYD in the region. So, I mean, if Trump, as he said in his first administration, says again, pull out of Syria, we have no proper interest there, and leave it whatever, he will be doing the right thing. But at the time, the neocons and others prevented him. Even one diplomat posted after he lost the elections, remember, that they actually cheated the president by saying, okay, Mr. President, we are acting upon your instruction, we are pulling out of Syria, but then they showed him certain maps and they gave him certain figures, blah, blah, but they cheated the president. If Trump is going to allow himself to be cheated again, I don't know. But in a multipolar world order, even the deep state elements in the United States will have to understand that, there is a limit to which they can play about with Turkey.
One last question before I let you go. Iran, as you pointed out, Iran is probably the biggest loser in this, well, beyond the Syrian people, and especially the minority communities like the Alawites, Christians, etc. Israel seems to be gearing up for, at the very least, threatening to attack Iran now that Syria and the air defense of Syria is no longer an issue. Do you think this is going to take place? Do you see this unfolding? I mean, the people I've spoken to from Iran have said that Iran is coming up with a new formulation to deal with what they expect to be a pressure campaign from the United States, with potential military action coming from Syria and maybe even the US. Do you expect this to take place? What are your thoughts?
Well, it again depends on the policy of Trump administration. Israel cannot actually face up to Iran on its own. I think Israel is a bit too, how shall I say, it seems to be acting as if it can do anything.
Right.
It is not that powerful. For instance, in the case of its, whatever you call skirmishes with Iran, if you like, by which the Iranians sent in missiles and drones into the Israeli territories. For the first time, Israeli territories basically experienced that, the Israeli population. So if Israel were to mess up with Iran to the point of attacking Iran on a full scale, that would result in, that would result in consequences for Israel on a major scale. But if Israel were to be backed up by the United States, what I think the ideal scenario Israel wants is the United States attacks Iran, and Israel would take part in the attack alongside the United States. But then the problem is, Iran is not going to be a, say, an easy target. It would actually present a formidable target for the United States. So it's not going to be an easy job, even for the United States, with its hypersonic missiles. And the Iranians may have even made some nuclear bombs. They may have made some of the bombs. They may, even if they may not, even if they haven't tested them, and that is also questionable. But what I'm saying, so Iran would be a formidable enemy even for the United States to take on. And if Israel tries to do the job on its own, then it would lead to very difficult scenario across the Middle East, because the United States could not leave Israel to its own, on its own in a very difficult situation. So I think it all depends. And in the case of the Trump administration formulating its policy towards Iran, then you have these two points. On the one hand, Trump doesn't want any wars. He wants to end all the wars. He wants to get the United States out of war zones, because he doesn't want to waste United States money in those senseless wars. I mean, to my view, he's quite right in saying all this. And on the other hand, there's a very powerful Israeli lobby, and that Israeli lobby is quite hand in glove with the Trump administration.
Yeah.
How these things are going to basically play out full force, again, it is going to be very interesting to watch.
Yeah, I don't have an answer for that one either. I don't know how that's going to work. That seems like a contradiction in terms.
Yeah.
Professor, man, thank you for this. I really appreciate this. God, I got to get one last question. Relationship between Iran and Turkey, and for that matter, Russia and Turkey. Can you give me a few words on those, and that'll close it?
Well, the Iranians are quite frustrated with Turkey and the role Turkey played in overthrowing Assad.
Put it mildly.
In the way they did. The other thing, the Russians may be equally frustrated, but the Russians don't give vent to their frustration, because they know they need Turkey on a variety of issues, involving large amount of trade between the two countries, even nuclear cooperation for a nuclear reactor they are building. Plus, can you imagine the help and assistance Turkey has actually offered to Russia in this war?
Right.
By not joining in the anti-Russian sanctions? Why not? Would you imagine if Turkey had been part of the war, like Poland, for instance, and opened up the whole of the Black Sea, all these fronts against Russia, the whole of Russia would have been vulnerable. So, and the Russians do appreciate that. At the same time, they are, I'm sure, quite frustrated with Turkey over Syria, but they don't say anything about that.
Right.
Instead, they just criticize Assad as everyone else does.
Yeah. Professor, man, thank you for this. Professor, or I should say Dr. Hasan Ünal, he's professor of political science and international relations at Başkent University in Ankara, Turkey. Thank you for this, man. Really informative. I really do appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
That's my pleasure.
All right. Great conversation from the professor. I don't know what to call him, professor or doctor. I'll just say Dr. Ünal. Deeply appreciate his conversation on this. We've had a lot of people given the Russian or Syrian perspective. Very few have been able to talk about it from the Turkish perspective. And this angle that I really appreciate, most people pointed out is Turkey has been able to advantage itself in this ploy, which it has. Let's be straight with that. By the same token, he has a good point that if this all falls apart, this is going to blow up in Turkey's face big time. in which case they're going to be left holding the bag for any and everything and the calamity that comes from it. And there's a big question. I'm glad he pointed out this idea that, in one sense, they're hesitant to assist the Muslim Brotherhood in Gaza. By the same token, they're willing to help this kind of offshoot and a similar ideology taking over in Syria. And whether or not these groups are going to invest money and resources into Syria, knowing that. I mean, honestly, a perspective can be taken that all of this was allowed because of the chaos, not because they were going to be able to form a government, meaning chaos was the point. That it wasn't this idea that a terrorist is going to be able to take over, they're going to be able to create this caliphate. No, that it was understood that the sectarian groups were going to fracture, and along the lines of those fractures was just going to be chaos and war. And that because there's going to be chaos and war, that other groups, either Israel or the US, will be able to put more influence in it because of the conflict, as opposed to having a stable, cohesive government that they exert a certain amount of influence in the region. It's a fascinating conversation, and he's right. This has just gotten more complicated, not less. It's gotten more complicated, not less. Coming up, Sabrina. Come on, there we are. Sabrina Savadi, she is coming up. We are going to have a great conversation. She's always easy to talk to. I want to point. So this is what Professor was talking about. And he's right. They've been joking the hell out of Annalena Baerbock over this. Now, all of you know, if you've watched the show at all, that I have a bit of a thing for Annalena Baerbock. I'm deeply attracted to this woman. I don't know why. She is a lunatic. Full-blown lunatic. And I mean that in every fullest sense of the word, despite the fact that she's with the Greens. The Greens are not the same in Europe. But notice what happens here. She goes, she reaches out, but Jelani is not reaching to shake her hand. He's not reaching to shake her hand. He is reaching to shake the other guy's hand, in which case she has to just bow in humiliation because she's a woman and he doesn't want to touch women. And so he doesn't want to touch her hand. He doesn't want to touch her hand. Now, Germany has been joking the hell out of her on this, meaning her own country has been laughing at her. And look at what they're putting out.
Entschuldigung.
They're saying that this is Annalena Baerbock in a burqa. And the woman is laughing at Annalena Baerbock, effectively saying that she's been burqarized. Is that a word, burqarized? I'm going to go with it. They're trying to say that this woman in a burqa is Annalena Baerbock, and that's why this woman is laughing so hard.
Einen schönen guten Morgen, meine Damen und Herren.
That's actually pretty damn funny, if you think about it. That's actually pretty damn funny. Oh, that is too funny. That is too funny. That is too funny. But she goes, tries to shake the hand, and she gets humiliated when he doesn't shake her hand. There's that. Now, that's the guy that they're calling a pro-democracy terrorist or a pro-democracy jihadist. They're saying that he's reformed, that women are going to be part of the government, all the stuff. I strongly suspect that what he means when he says women's rights is that women have a right to clean up in the household and make dinner. They do not have a right to be in government. We will see. But the fact that he's not even willing to shake her hand gives some kind of context to the government that he is going to create and form. I want to show another video. There's nothing to say hardcore like shooting yourself on camera. There's nothing to say how hardcore you are at shooting yourself on camera. So this gangster rapper, I don't know who he is. Forgive me for not knowing who he is. I just know him as a guy who shot himself on camera, is sitting here. And by the way, trigger warning for this. Ironically, trigger warning in case somebody is, a weeping willow. They're having an interview on air. And this happens.
And choices we got in life, those were your choices. Who shot who? Somebody got shot?
You good, Lo?
I hope.
Is somebody got shot? Yes. Yes. Look at his face. Wait a minute. And look right here. So if you look at the very bottom of the screen, you can see it. Hold on.
And choices we got in life, those were your choices.
Bam. And you can see it come out right through here, through his pants leg. That fool shot himself on air. That fool shot himself on air. For one, why are you playing with a gun on air? Why are you doing that? There's that. Two,
Who
how
shot
did
who?
he not know?
Somebody got shot?
Yes, your boy
Oh.
right here. And look at the look on his face after he gets shot. Wait a minute. Look at the look on his face. That's a, oh, I think I just shot myself. That's what that look is. I think I just shot myself. And dude's like, did somebody get shot? Somebody get shot? Yes, bro. Somebody got shot. Somebody got shot. What a stupid idiot. How do you even do that? How do you do that? Why? For one, why are you playing with a gun? There's that. Why are you playing with a gun? Two, why are you playing with a gun on air? Why are you playing with a gun on air? And three, how do you shoot yourself on air? And if I'm not mistaken, they continue the interview. They continue the interview. They keep going, if I'm not mistaken. After he shoots himself, I think they continue and proceed with the interview. That's just amazing. That's amazing. That is just amazing. That is quite possibly the dumbest thing, the saddest thing that has happened up to this point this year that has been on a war zone. Just idiocy, just outright idiocy. Boom. Who shot somebody? Did somebody get shot? Did somebody get shot? Yes, bro, somebody got shot. The guy who's sitting right beside you got shot in the middle of the studio, no less. In the middle of the studio. I want to go to another story. So, yeah, we have a few minutes before Sabrina gets in. Brazil is doing God's work. Brazil is doing God's work. So an Israeli goes to Brazil for vacation and gets a rude awakening when they decide to keep him for potential prosecution. So this guy that you're seeing in the corner did this. Look at this. This is an Israeli. This is a Lebanon or Gaza. I don't remember which one. I believe this may be in Gaza. But look at what he did to this location. This is an entire block. Yes. Saw that right. They set explosives to the entire neighborhood and blew up the entire neighborhood because it's cheaper, I suppose, than just dropping bombs on it. Brazil finds out that the guy who did it is on vacation, and they try to hold him for potential prosecution for war crimes. They try to hold him for potential prosecution for war crimes. Good job, Brazil. Good job, Brazil. You are doing God's work. Apparently, Sri Lanka has tried to do something similar in this regard. Some of the reports have it that they're going to try to get this guy out of Brazil, basically try to serendipitously, that's not the right word for it, that they're going to try to quietly get him out of Brazil. Now, whether that works or not, I don't quite know. But that seems to be the story that is coming up. In another story, Justin Trudeau may be stepping down. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, hated Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, may be stepping down. he may be given his walking papers with this thought that he is going to announce resignation after the calls for him have gotten so loud and his approval rating has gotten so low that they're trying to get rid of him now. Now, I would like to point out that I have said on many occasions that many of these governments in the West are gonna collapse. This is not magic on my part. This was not overtly intuitive on my part. No, what it boiled down to is this idea that people would accept a certain amount of propaganda as long as it doesn't affect them. The moment that it affects you, it's different. And I want to segue into a conversation about the US policy in Europe. Europe is getting taken for a ride. It's been taken for a scam. And it's shocking to me that Europe doesn't quite understand this and doesn't quite get this in real terms. And I mean this literally. Europe is being taken for a ride. They believe for some reason that they're working at the same ends or even keel with the United States. The United States does not see it that way. That is not the way we look at it. We look at Europe in a similar way as we look at Ukraine, or for that matter, as we look at Taiwan. It is a proxy, no more, no less. And as a proxy, it allows us to do X or Y to go after somebody else with us not taking the direct damage from it while putting that damage on somebody else. So in Europe's situation, you get a deindustrialization of Europe with many of these German companies leaving Europe and coming into the United States because they can't afford the energy in Europe. You get Trump threatening Europe to buy our gas that is going to be 5 times higher than what Europe would pay for, let's say, Russia. And even then, when they're getting the gas from, let's say, Saudi Arabia or India, the gas is ultimately still Russian oil that they're paying a markup because they're getting it from a third party supplier. Same thing with the weapons. So the US wants Europe to put all of this money, hundreds of billions of dollars, into Ukraine. Much of that money are just weapon sales. Weapon sales, if I'm not mistaken, 70% of which, if not more, are coming from the United States. So if you think about it, all of these things are effectively taking money from Europe and putting it into America. And Europe is doing this hand over fist with this idea of standing by Ukraine. Now, if you live in Europe, you live in Germany or somewhere, and you see your businesses leaving, you see arguments being made that your life and what you've been accustomed to as a life should take a hit for Ukraine. If you see all of these people coming into Europe, that is shifting the politics of Europe into a more right-leaning direction, not to mention the right parties are the only parties that are interested in not going to war and effectively doing what they consider to be in the best interest of their country. In this case, more nationalistic governments saying, why are we doing this at the behest of the US? Why are we looking out for our own best interests in foreign policy? The politics change, they shift. And they shift in a direction of something that makes more sense. So you have the Romanian government where a guy comes out of nowhere saying, I'm a nationalist for Romania, and I do not see the point of us getting into some kind of conflict with Russia. Okay, well, they don't like that guy. They hate that guy. They call him pro-Russian, despite the fact that he's taken a position that is pro-Romanian. Same thing, by the way, is true with Georgia, where you get a Georgian government, Georgian Dream Party, that says we are not going to be used as a second front to go against Russia. And of course, Europe hates the guy and they call it a pro-Russian government, despite the fact that it's a pro-Georgian government and they're looking out for the best interests of Georgia. I'm saying in one situation after the next, when a group will come up that will be a pro whatever the government position is, they cast it as pro-Russian, despite the fact that it's pro that government. And that they're looking out for the best interests of that government. Same thing with Slovakia, or for that matter, same thing with Hungary. I'm pointing out that it doesn't take a mystic to look at a situation where you're deindustrializing a country, or let's say a nation, and I'm saying Europe is a collection of nations, and you're taking the resources and revenue and dumping it into the United States to the detriment of your own. It doesn't take a mystic or seer or it doesn't take somebody who is all that intuitive to point out this is going to fail. This is going to fail. This process, meaning these governments, will collapse. It's that simple. That was the way I looked at it. I didn't see a situation where these governments were going to be able to take this kind of pro-hawkish stance to their own detriments and remain in power. If you're looking at it from an industry standpoint, from an economic standpoint, the energy that was coming from the pipelines in Nord Stream, Angela Merkel fought for those pipelines because they needed those pipelines. And if you've been in Germany, let's say in the winter or something, their energy is already expensive. And that energy has been made that much more so. If you need to buy anything, if you need to buy toilet paper, if you need to buy baby lotion, if you're a puff daddy in Europe and you need to buy baby oil, it takes energy to make that stuff. And so you can imagine that if energy costs go up 5 times, somebody has to pay for that. The population has to pay for that. The government has to pay for that. So not only are you paying more for energy, but you're also giving money to Ukraine, who just stopped the energy that you were getting at whatever particular price you were getting it at. All of this stuff is damaging Europe. And if you are somebody who's sitting in Europe, who's a rational actor, you may ask yourself, why are we doing this again? How is this our benefit? How is this not to our detriment? Whereas America has its ability to make its own oil, not to mention make its own oil and gas, to sell us theirs for 5 times more. How is this to our betterment? It doesn't take a genius to know that human beings and the way that human beings typically react, that even if they're propagandized to at a certain point, the pain will be too much and the propaganda will fail to reality. And that is where we are. Propaganda failing to reality. So the Scholz government, he will lose. He will be on his way out. Macron only has remained in this kind of fig leaf of power by blowing off the election results. And with these groups working together in order to keep out Marine Le Pen's party from taking power in that situation. And in the next election, Macron's party will lose again. David Cameron, not Cameron. What is his name? He'll come to me in a moment. But my guest is here. We are joined. There we are. Welcome to the show. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. What's going on, Jamal? Sorry I'm late. I had a smoke detector situation to deal with.
You are perfectly fine. You're perfectly fine. We're joined with Sabrina Salvati. She is a Boston-based activist, leftist, and podcaster. She's a member of the Revolutionary Blackout Network, a Black-led multicultural network and co-opt of everyday people, activists, and allies focused on empowering our communities through education, organization, and direct action. I really appreciate you joining me. I always appreciate your appearances, actually, and thank you for this. The last time I spoke with you, we had the opportunity to have this kind of Black men after Kamala Harris loss, and this kind of conversation among African-American men about their take on the Democratic Party and everything like that. From your take on this, what did you get out of that conversation? Was there anything that you took from that at the end of that conversation among all of these various Black men with their own different takes on that election?
Yeah, just that, obviously Black male voters feel neglected by the Democratic Party. That was the sentiment, I think, across the panel. And also on top of that, just that, there seemed to be a general consensus on the panel that people are looking for something different. People want to move in a different direction. And I think Mark Lamont Hill was one of the ones that said Black people need to leave the Democratic Party. So I think that was we're seeing more people trending in that direction. But it was very clear from the panel that there does seem to be a sort of neglect of the Democratic Party with Black male voters. They seem to be heavily focused on Black women and not asking what are the needs of Black male voters. And that is a problem. And I think the Democratic Party knows that. I just don't think they want to do anything about it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, it seems like they want to deal with this through a messaging thing. Like, we need to message better. We need to come up with better rhetoric in order to deal with this issue. I don't think it's a messaging thing. I think a lot of that stuff is image. I think it's this kind of inability to separate wheat from chaff. And that sounds weird. Oftentimes, from my point of view, Democrats exist in a bubble, and liberals in general. And because they think they're right and that they're more moral and more ethical, then when they get something wrong, they don't quite understand that they're getting it wrong. And so if you had the opportunity to speak to a liberal, they're like, well, Kamala Harris is clearly the better candidate. And I don't understand why anybody would not vote for her. And these people are clearly just racist and sexist and bigoted because she ran a flawless campaign. Like, this is the rhetoric that comes out of them where they don't quite get, dude, you have become so negligibly, like, the difference between you and the Republican Party has become so negligible that you can't get people to get out of bed in the morning. We already have a right-wing party. Why do we need two? And if you look at from policy, I mean, for God's sake, she ran around the country with Liz Cheney, of all people. Joe Biden, and going into this, Joe Biden just gave Hillary Clinton, Soros, and Liz Cheney a medal. I think it was just below the Medal of Honor, which is just mind-blowing. Give me a take on that. Like, what are they trying to communicate by giving these people medals as if they've done something heroic and fantastic for the country?
I think they're trying to tell people what they want the Democratic Party to be, that they really don't want the Democratic Party to change, like the old guard. They want things to remain the same. I mean, it's really interesting because even James Carville now is speaking out against the Democrat strategy and that maybe they should move in a different direction. So that's really interesting, him of all people, because he was very much against like progressive policies and campaigns. He wanted things to remain the way that they were. So even he is speaking out against where the Democratic Party is headed. And to your point about liberals, I'm here in Massachusetts, very blue for the most part, but there are red pockets. A lot of people don't realize that. And I saw Donald Trump increase his support here in Massachusetts, which, you know, a lot of people would say, what, are you kidding me? But those same sentiments were given to me as well, Jamal. Like the same thing. People are like, I don't understand how anybody could not support Kamala Harris. And what I would explain to them is that, you know, the economy was a big one, that everyone's number one issue is not abortion, despite what you may believe, especially towards like the liberal women here. Right. And that the Democratic Party isn't doing anything for its base. It is pandering more towards like the Nikki Haley type of voter, like that type of thing. And I mean, I would just get shocked eyeballs. Like they would just stare at me like, what are you talking about? Are you serious? And that type of thing. And I would often push back when they would say things like, well, if you're supporting Trump, like that means you're racist, da da da. And I was like, you guys can be racist too, bud.
Yep.
And they don't tend to like it when I point that out. It's like, no. Like you may agree with some of the issues when it comes to equality. Like you may agree that LGBTQ should have equal rights. You may agree that trans people should have, equal rights. You may agree that, Black people should, have more fairness, etc. But these same voters, when those people move into your neighborhood, you don't want them living next door to you. You guys are still the same people that'll pick up the phone and will call the cops if you see a Black person in your neighborhood. So you guys are racist too, bud. You're just covert racist instead of overt racist. And they don't like it when you point that out. But there obviously are big problems regardless of which political party you're a part of. But those medals that you saw that were given to Hillary Clinton, for some reason, Denzel Washington was in the mix there. It was a kind of eclectic mix. But again, it's a message from the old guard of the Democratic Party that they don't want things to change. And because Hillary Clinton did not win the presidency, there seems to be this consensus that like we have to give her something.
Right, which I don't like it. I mean, it was almost like they thought it was her turn. And the fact that she didn't win, it being her turn, it's like, well, we have to offer her something. Carville, to your point, Carville is fascinating to me because Carville, I don't get him as an ideologue. He just wants to win. And so whatever it means for Carville to win is what Carville wants to go by. I remember some of the stuff he was like, this is not about a vanity project. This is not about making yourselves feel good and losing. The job is to win. It's a campaign. It's a war. This is what we're supposed to do. And so that's the way he thinks about it. Now, I accept that, he doesn't necessarily like Sanders and everything else, but I get the sense that he is willing to shape himself into whatever in order to win the contest. I mean, because, he's been having this kind of weird come to Jesus moment where he's like, I've been feeling around in the dark, not knowing where I'm supposed to go. Because again, from their point of view, they're right. It's astonishing conversation when you have it with them, and it's like you're beating your head on the wall. Like, dude, how can you not see that your brand has been damaged? And they don't get it. Well, I mean, Liz Cheney, she was a great American, so she should get an award. It's like, no, she shouldn't. She should. Just stop.
No, absolutely not. I was just going to say, I think James Carville, too, also has a little bit of shame because he said that Kamala Harris was, going to win in a landslide. She's definitely going to. So there's a little bit of shame there, too.
So, one of the things I've been getting at, and speaking of that, so Kamala Harris, I guess this is, they've been having a little bitterness in the party, especially with Joe Biden. Apparently, they said Joe Biden is very bitter at various people. Kamala Harris was given this, they're signing in people for Congress. Listen to what she says about Sanders. I don't know if you can hear it, but I'm going to play the clip. Let me know if you can't hear it. She said, that is not in your nature to stand where you're supposed to stand.
Mm-hmm.
What the hell does that mean? What the hell does that mean?
I don't know.
It's like a microaggression, right?
I feel like it's her trying to prove that she can do something. Like, it just, I don't know, man. I feel like Bernie Sanders, number one, needs to be a little bit more ballsy. I think that him speaking out about the Democratic Party after Kamala lost, like, that's nice. But I do think that Bernie has allowed.
It's too late at that point, right? I mean, it's almost like, hey, I lost my job, but I'm calling to pay this bill. It's too late. You've lost your tips. Yeah.
They're still trying to make her a thing. Like, they still want to, again, like Hillary, they feel like they owe something to Kamala Harris. This is why they're toting this idea about maybe she should run for governor of California or she should run for president again. They feel like they owe it to her to give her something. And that is just, it's embarrassing. And on its face, it's really sad. Yeah.
No, I agree with you. I don't know what they gave her $2 billion. They gave her $2 billion. That's enough. At the point where somebody spends $1.5 billion in 3 months and then they end up $20 million in debt. Okay, that's enough. And talking about that, the amount of money and how they spent the money on. One of the things that they spent the money on were influencers. Now, this is wild because, it's like they're giving people money and not telling those people, or those people telling, I got money from the Kamala Harris campaign as I speak to you. I mean, this was the Roland Martin issue. This was the issue with Al Sharpton, where they were getting hundreds of thousands of dollars to do what were, for all intents and purposes, press ads or press announcements without telling you that it was a press announcement. It was going under the guise of an interview. Same thing with Oprah Winfrey. Oprah Winfrey got like $1 million to do that press advert that was disguised as an interview. Well, for social media influencers, it's even worse because they're getting money without necessarily saying below it, this is paid for by Kamala Harris. They don't say that. They just give you their political point of view that just so happens to be for Kamala Harris, not telling people that they got all that money to do so. One of the guys who apparently got money standing right beside Joe Biden, because if you remember, David Pakman also has that picture standing beside Joe Biden. And so there's this question of, hey, did you get money from the Democratic Party also? And you standing by this particular person. This guy, though, is a bit of a lunatic. Listen to some of the stuff that he has been saying. And again, he got money. Yep. Believe me, he got money. Let's play the clip.
all you fake ass Bernie, bro. Stop putting this big black woman with these yellow arms under my post. Fuck Rashida, bitch. I don't damn about this bitch. I don't fuck with AOC. AOC can't do a motherfucking thing for me, but make me a goddamn martini, bitch. She can't do shit for me. She can take her ass back to the motherfucking bartending days, bitch. She ain't done shit. Fuck Bernie Sanders.
I mean, this is a bit aggressive, to put it mildly. And this is the guy, or one of the people who apparently the Democratic Party thought this is a great guy to pay to go out there and influence the population to support the Democratic Party. Attacking other Democrats, just astonishing. I'm sorry.
It's also a bad image for the Black community too. Let's pay this guy to behave in this sort of way. Like that was just absolutely ridiculous. But not surprising. I think people need to remember that a lot of these people that are paid, and you can kind of tell that they're paid influencers by they go over the top. They constantly bend over backwards for that particular candidate. They don't correct the candidate. They don't hold them accountable. So those are obvious signs. But it's interesting because those people and like their flock, they were the ones that pointed fingers at those of us that were voting third party. They tried to say that we were the ones that were getting paid. And I always pay attention to that because I was like, no, it's probably you. It's not me. It's probably you. You can always look up that information because these campaigns, they do have to report their spending. So all you have to do is look on the FEC website and you can see which companies, because they do it through a company, which companies that these campaigns are paying. Then you can just look up the company and you can see who is an influencer, you know, with that company. So I tried to tell people this before. A lot of these people are paid to do what they're doing. So this whole thing that David Pakman was invited to, you know, we know David Pakman does take sponsorships. I don't know if he was one of the paid influencers under that particular company or not. But they did mention that Brian Tyler Cohen has been one of those paid influencers before. So it's just that guy has over 3 million subscribers. Like, you guys got to understand, it's a pay to play game. And those of us that can kind of break through without having to do that, it's far and few. The majority are choosing to pay to play. Like, you mean to tell me there's nobody else that they could have invited to the White House that has over 1 million subscribers, right? Why they're only inviting the people that were paid to do what they did. So, and then something else I want to add for people who are not aware, David Pakman talked about this on his show, and he went forward to say that the discussion that was had was to make it so that those particular influencers would get access to politicians in DC, and they would do like a round table of sorts where all of them can come to DC and just interview like AOC back to back to back to back. He talked about now we're going to be able to get AOC on the show, etc. So just keep that in mind. Like, there are people that have been in this space for over 10 plus years. They can't get AOC to come onto their show. So just keep that in mind, folks. They are trying to make what was independent media the new corporate media. So it is corporate media with a little bit more of a different atmosphere, right? So it looks a little bit more independent because it's on YouTube. They don't have the fancy studios that obviously CNN has, but they are doing the work of corporate media. I was warning people that this was coming.
Well, and you're absolutely right. I mean, because corporate media, you know, they were the gatekeepers in many respects. And when social media broke down or, you know, came to fruition, you had all of these mega channels. So you still were able to get almost just as many, if not more people on your social media than they were getting on mainstream media. So obviously the campaigns are going to look at this and think, we need influence. And so there were these Democratic adjacent channels. I would put TYT, Sam Cedar, Pakman. I would put these people under that particular umbrella. And these people were able to get, let's say, interviews with various political people, but regular social media, not so much. And as you pointed out, all of a sudden, AOC is popping up on people's social media account. Kamala Harris is popping up on social media accounts. I mean, the Call Me Daddy thing, where she ends up paying all of the money to rebuild an entire studio set. I mean, you know, that's pretty outrageous. I don't take issue with them doing it per se. I take more issue with that telling people that they're doing it. Like, it's a bit dicey to me to come out and advocate for a campaign, but you're not telling people that you got paid by the campaign to advocate for the campaign. Like under normal circumstances, they would point out this ad has been paid for by the Kamala Harris campaign, and they put it up there so you know this is a campaign ad. Same thing is true for media. If somebody wrote an article, they would put this article is paid for by the Kamala Harris campaign for blah, 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 blah. They're not doing that.
No.
Doing that.
That should be required, but they're not required to do it. They're not required to do it. And then there's another thing, like if that story was not released about Al Sharpton being paid to take that money, if that story was not released by about Roland Martin, they were paid to take the money, will we have known about that?
We would not have been known about that. We would not have. And you know, the point that I've tried to make to people, they say, well, they would have voted for either way. That doesn't really matter. I mean, the fact of the matter is, I'll give you an example. Chris Matthews. When Chris Matthews was interviewing Hillary Clinton, I believe they were on MSNBC. One of Chris Matthews' issues was the Iraq War. So Chris Matthews is asleep that entire interview. Oh, you know, your hair looks nice today, and you smell amazing, and you know, what size shoes are you wearing? Just that type of an interview. And then out of the blue, it looks like he just popped up and asked her a critical question on the issue of Iraq, which shocked her. And even if you look at the black journalist thing, what Kamala Harris was doing, and they kept asking her about Palestine over and over and over. And she hated the fact that they were asking her about that question. Meaning you could have somebody that you're voting for that you still ask a critical question because it's within your wheelhouse. It's something that you personally care about. In the case where you're getting that much money, $500,000, are you going to ask that question? Meaning, does that question get asked at all when you're paying or getting paid that much money to do an interview that you're not disclosing to your audience? I guess my point of view is no. If you weren't getting paid, you may vote for that person, but still want to ask a critical question that you may not ask if indeed somebody is giving you the money for it. So no, we wouldn't have known at all. Please.
Not only that, but another thing I think people should take into consideration when we're talking about the types of questions that they ask them. Remember, one of the rules with Kamala Harris in particular is that she had to have the questions prior to the interview. That was another thing with the Joe Rogan as well. Like she wanted to know, her team said, we need to know what the questions are going to be prior to the interview. I think we all know, like Joe Rogan talks for like 3 hours.
Yes, he does.
So obviously I don't think he's going to give people the questions. Like he just kind of just flies like off his head. He doesn't, I don't think even have these questions written down from what it looks like. Right. So that was another thing too, that maybe she may be uncomfortable taking questions that she's not willing to answer.
And she should run for president.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. You're right. And it's not even just the presidential candidates. Some of the congressional candidates are also this way. Some of the congressional candidates also ask up front, what are the questions going to be prior to the interview? You'd be surprised.
Well, it misses the point though. Like, because the reality of it is when people are asking questions in these interviews, they're not perfunctory, right? The entire point in this kind of schoolboy philosophy of things is that you are going to be given a lot of power to do X and Y, and we need to know what you're actually going to do. Now, it may be in your best interest to hide that information from us. It is in our best interest to get that information. And the only way we can get that is through interrogation. What have you done in the past? What are you planning to do now? And whether or not there's reality to what you are saying and you're telling people. And people can make a judgment on whether or not you're being true and honest, and then they can make an assessment of who they want more so over one person over the other. They fundamentally miss the point if it's, well, we want to give a corporate answer to everything that we're asked, because that hides the reality of what they're trying to do and what they're trying to accomplish. And so I get it that they may want that, but it is not in the public's interest to give them that. And part of the benefit of speaking to Joe Rogan for 3 hours is that it gets to the nub of something that you might not be able to get to in these 2-minute sound spots or these 2-minute interviews or these 2-minute debates that these guys are having on stage. It's aggravating to me. It's like they have fundamentally missed the entire point of these kind of political campaigns and these political races, or for that matter, even the interviews. It's just bizarre.
But the goal isn't necessarily to win. The goal is to fundraise, right? And she raised a lot of money.
It depends. I mean, like, I agree with you. Like, from their point of view, the side with the most money typically wins the race. I think it's like 90% of the congressional races are won by the side with the most cash. And so from their point of view, I just need to raise as much money as I possibly can. So agreed. I do think on some level the candidate wants to win. From the people who are running the campaigns, I don't think they care. Like the what do they call them? The consultants, that class, they just move from election to election to election, making millions of dollars. I don't think they care. The candidate?
Yep. Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
You brought up a really good point. And that's who they take cues from, right? Like the people, the consultant class, the tired to come in to tell them what they need to do. And they just kind of, the consultant class will come in and say, okay, you're going to go here, go there, do this interview this day, do this the next day, that kind of thing. Now, again, to that point, if the presidential candidate is not happy with the way that that staff is operating, they can fire them and hire somebody else. We've seen this happen before, like RFK had people leave, Marianne Williamson had people leave, then they'll bring in different people. So that wouldn't be a new concept. But I think that this whole situation with Kamala, you know, it wasn't the first time we saw her run for president. Remember, she ran in 2020, and it was very clear then she really did not have it. She didn't have it to be president. But when she first announced that she was running, I remember back then, and you probably do too, Jamal, people were hyping her up then. Like the corporate media, they were hyping it up. They were saying she's an AKA. She went to Howard, and like I was like, okay. And then I remember, like, I saw Kamala Harris speak. I saw her speak in New Hampshire, and I said to myself, "Oh, she's not ready. She's not ready. No. And that's who, and they were trying to push, you know, anybody but Bernie Sanders at that point. Remember, they were trying to push anybody else but him. But even back then I said, no, she don't have it. She hasn't got it. They were just like propping her up, and they knew then she didn't have it. And I guess they figured since she's been vice president for a couple of years, maybe now that she's ready, but she wasn't. Joe Biden did not want Kamala Harris to be his VP. Does everybody remember this? He wanted Amy Klobuchar.
Yep. Clyburn. Basically, Clyburn needed, they wanted to give her to Sanders. South Carolina was the state that they needed to get, because if people remember, up to that point, Joe Biden was failing miserably in that race. Sanders looked like he was going to run away with it, especially if he had taken South Carolina. Clyburn is believed to have delivered South Carolina to Joe Biden with this thing of, I want a Black woman to be VP, and that person needs to be Kamala Harris. And so, yeah, it wasn't something that they wanted. And if you remember, I'm glad you brought up the other campaign. She overspent in that campaign also. If you go back and look at the quotes associated with that campaign in the primaries, she ran out of money also. She was overspending. She thought she was a top-tier candidate. Even when Tulsi Gabbard went after her in the debate, she says, well, I'm a top-tier candidate. And this woman is, you know, like, why is she even talking to me in this particular fashion? She shouldn't be on the debate stage because I'm top tier. That was the way she saw herself. Yeah, she wasn't ready. Yep. Speaking of that, and I'm glad you mentioned that too. A lot of Democrats are now trying to blame Joe Biden, saying he didn't get out the race, he hit his age, or he hit his cognitive capabilities. And, you know, a lot of people like me have been pointing out that Joe Biden was not in his right mind for a long time. If you remember when Her came out with the report, basically on whether or not to prosecute Joe Biden for the same thing that they were prosecuting Donald Trump for, something similar in regards to the documents case. Her report was, he's a well-meaning old man with a bad memory, and he is so bad off, I do not think I can get a conviction because of how bad off he is. Now, Democrats flipped out. Oh my God, how dare you talk about the president like that? How dare you say that about Joe Biden? And then anytime a video would come out of Joe Biden, you know, looking crazy, walking off into the wilderness, missing his words, forgetting his words, just this weird stuff that he was doing because he's an older man. They would say those are deep fakes. That's not real. And now we find out that going all the way back to day one, that his staff knew that he wasn't altogether there mentally, hid the fact that he wasn't there altogether there mentally. Chuck Schumer gets pushed on this and asked, hey, did you guys lie to us about this? Meaning, then you kept saying that this man was sharp as a tack. You kept saying, you know, that he's on it, that he, you know, has sex with Jill Biden twice a week, that he is, you know, fully there. And now we find out that that's not really true. Listen to what Chuck Schumer is saying here, because Chuck Schumer is trying to say, no, 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 we didn't lie. And is lying through his teeth as he tries to tell the American public, no, 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 we didn't lie.
I want to play you a little bit of something you said last year. Take a look.
I talk to President Biden, regularly, sometimes several times in a week, or usually several times in a week. His mental acuity is great. It's fine. It's as good as it's been over the years. All this right-wing propaganda that his mental acuity has declined is wrong.
Leader Schumer, what do you say to Americans who feel as though you and other top Democrats misled them about President Biden's mental acuity?
No. Look, we didn't, and let's look at President Biden. He's had an amazing record. The legislation we passed, one of the most significant groups of legislation since since Lyndon Johnson's Great Society, putting in 235 judges, a record, and he's a patriot. He's a great guy. And when he stepped down, he did it on his own because he thought it was better not only for the Democratic Party, for America. We should all salute him. We should all salute him.
Do you feel as
He did it on his own. He stepped down purely on his own. He's just such a great American. He's just a great man. And because he's such a great man, he just stepped down on his own because he cares about America so much. I remember when they said Rich cheated on his wife with cancer because he just loved America that much. That's what that puts me in the mind of, right? Where it's like everybody and their mama knows that Joe Biden didn't want to step down, which is why he's bitter now. And they ate him like a bunch of howler monkeys, eating supper. They did any and everything in his power to eat Joe Biden alive for those last 2 months. Give me your take on Schumer. Because the Democrats are running with this idea, this noble lie or this noble myth that Joe Biden just stepped down on his own because he was just a great man who loved America.
So Chuck Schumer was the one, if I remember reading correctly, that was in that room. He was one of the people, along with Dem leadership, that was asking Joe Biden to step down. If I remember correctly, it was Chuck Schumer, Obama, Hakeem Jeffries, and Nancy Pelosi, right? They were the ones that went to Joe Biden and told him that you need to step out of the race. Like, you're not going to win the numbers. And from what I understand, they were saying that at that point in time, it showed that Donald Trump was going to get 400 electoral votes when Joe Biden was still in the race, for people who are not aware. And they told Joe Biden, look, the numbers show that you can't win. We saw the internal polls. You're not going to be able to win this thing. And Joe Biden didn't believe them. He said that the polls were wrong and he didn't buy it or whatever. But eventually they did convince him that you got to go. And so what was supposed to happen on their end is that they were going to have an open primary. That's what Obama and Pelosi wanted to happen. And Joe Biden, to spite them, decided to nominate Kamala Harris because he didn't appreciate being pushed out the race. Apparently all that happened that same day. Yeah. So to get back at what they were doing to him, he decided to nominate Kamala Harris. So that's Chuck Schumer. He's just playing his part there. Chuck Schumer knew that Joe Biden, was experiencing cognitive decline. Mm-hmm. I think all of them knew. We knew even on the debate stage in 2020, we saw he was having difficulty then too. So it wasn't like it just started when he became president, but there was significant decline during his presidency. So they all knew, they all tried to hide it. And I think that it's got to be somewhat embarrassing, I think, for the Democratic Party that all of this came out in the open, because I don't think that I don't think that Dem leadership expected Joe Biden to defy them in that way and just say, that's it, I'm going to nominate Kamala Harris, because even they didn't think Kamala could win. Do you remember that video that was on Twitter? I think AOC posted this on her Instagram, but it was on Twitter, and AOC posted that, I want to tell you guys a little secret. Even a lot of the Democrat politicians didn't want Kamala Harris as the nominee. Remember that?
Yeah.
I do remember. They didn't think she could win. And Obama didn't think that she could win either. Turns out Obama was right. But the reality is, at the end of the day, everybody just kind of got on board because they're going to support their party regardless. But they knew that it was unlikely for her to win. So add that to the paid influencer story, And it makes it seem like basically Kamala Harris's campaign was a scam altogether.
Extremely good point. And if you talk to Democrat liberals today, they'd be like, what do you mean that she couldn't win? It's like nobody thought that she could win at the time. Like, and yet that's the argument that these guys are putting forward. Before I close it, one last thing, H1B1. I have been fascinated by this conversation because you've had elements of the right, the MAGA crowd, who would argue, well, wait a minute, this is not what we voted for. We believe that you were going to fight for every American worker. And now you're telling us that American workers are lazy and that they're not super involved and that you want to replace American workers with foreigners. Now that's, the Elon Musk, the Vivek Ramaswamis, the Donald Trumps of the world seem to be perfectly okay with this, where they want to effectively bring in indentured servants in order to work in these tech jobs to replace American workers, where you get the Loomers of the world, the Steve Bannons of the world, who said, well, this is outrageous. This is not necessarily what we voted for in regards to Trump. Simultaneously, though, they also want to destroy the Department of Education. So it's super weird. Give me your take on this. We have about 2 minutes before we close it.
Well, I guess in some ways they're trying to look and see like where can we cut costs, right? So they feel like the Department of Education isn't really serving its purpose. And some people on the left agree with that as well. But the H-1B visa thing, it totally goes against everything that they championed for, which was that they were going to put Americans first. And that includes, like they said, we're going to get good jobs here for Americans. Remember Donald Trump, what did he say? He said they're taking jobs from Black people. Remember that whole thing?
Yep.
So again, people say what they want you to hear when they're running a campaign. But once they win, you see who they look out for, the corporations. And that's the thing. Now Vivek is coming back and he's saying that, well, I was talking about putting American corporations first. You see how they're trying to switch up that rhetoric, et cetera?
Wow.
But this is about like just getting cheap labor.
For people too, my friend.
Right. This is about them getting cheap labor. They want people that they can exploit. Vivek and Elon, remember, they're both entrepreneurs. Yep. They take advantage of the H-1B visa process. Don't forget that Elon didn't even want Tesla workers to unionize. Like, let's not forget these things. So it's not that these are worker-friendly people. They never have been. Donald Trump bragged about using H-1B visas as well. This is what they want to do so that they can make sure that they benefit, they make the most money, and everybody else under them, they're just consistently exploited. Now, it's not like they go around and say that they're against worker exploitation to begin with anyway. So let's remember that. But I will say I do applaud like those that are part of the MAGA base that have chosen to speak out against this. Agreed. Because I do feel like this is what I was looking for people who supported Biden and Kamala to do, to call them out on their BS. And Democrats weren't willing to do that. And so it is good to see that MAGA supporters are willing to call them out and say, no, this is not what you sold us. Some of them are saying they want a refund, that type of thing. So we'll have to wait and see what happens. But it's not starting out too well, and he's not even in office yet.
Yeah, he's betrayed his base already, and hasn't even gotten in office yet. And for all of those people who said, well, these people are just robots. Well, obviously not, because this is, if they were robots, they would have just fell in line on this issue. And that's not necessarily seeming what's taking place. I mean, you have Steve Bannon screaming that he's going to war over this issue. It's just fascinating to me. Like, they're taking a pro-worker position against Trump, who's taking this pro-corporate position with Vivek and Elon Musk. Just fascinating back and forth.
And this is where that populist movement could have it just makes you wonder. This is where like that part of the populist movie. Army said that we need a new party that is going to run on the issue of healthcare, right? Because of, that's something that I think people on the right and the left do agree with. Yeah. And then also the worker issue as well. Like, it's apparent that both people on the left and on the right do want Americans to be prioritized for these jobs.
Agreed. 1,000% agree. Like, this idea that there's no overlap is nonsense. There are areas where we agree on the left and the right. Sabrina, thank you for this. I really appreciate it. I know it's early. I have to drag myself early in the mornings myself sometimes, so I definitely feel you on this. Thank you. I really appreciate it. I know my audience loves you. Sabrina Savadi, she is a Boston-based activist, leftist, and podcaster. She is also a member of the Revolutionary Blackout Network. Definitely check them out. I get their the feed on Twitter all the time. A Black-led multicultural network and co-op of everyday people, activists, and allies focused on empowering communities through education, organization, and direct action. Definitely check her out. Check her channel out. She is awesome. Thank you for this, Sabrina. I really appreciate it.
Bye.
All right. I would like to go to my next guest. We are joined with the one and only, the man himself of the hour, Michael Maloof. Michael Maloof is a former senior security policy analyst in the Office of Secretary of Defense, author, and regular contributing analyst on RT and other media outlets. He has nearly 30 of federal service in the U.S. Department of Defense and is a great friend of this show. Happy New Year, Michael. How you doing, man? You doing all right today?
I'm great. I've already started to shovel the snow outside, and all's good.
Have you? Yeah, it's snowing in Richmond. So yeah, it's snowing here too. I went out this morning, or at the very least, when I look out the window this morning, you have this nice little thin thread of snow covering everything.
We have about 5 inches right now.
Where are you located? You're in DC, or where are you?
In Reston, just outside of DC.
Oh, so you're okay. See, I just left DC Friday, so I don't necessarily know what's going on the ground up there. But wow, just be careful.
It all happened after midnight, and it's going to continue throughout the day and into the night.
Oh, that's unfortunate because I need to drive to DC.
Well, we only get this once every 3 to 4 years, and anything beyond an inch is a snowmageddon here. You know that.
People freak out. Yeah, it's like, oh my God, there's an inch of snow. So I want you on because, and I'm really appreciate you coming on because I wanted to get into this quote unquote counteroffensive that Ukraine apparently launched over the weekend, that they're doubling down in Kiev, which is wild to me because the reality of it is they seem to acknowledge at this point that this war is lost. And even if you listen to Blinken, when Blinken, they were asking him, hey, do you have any expectation that Ukraine is going to take any territory? And the answer was no. And so, you want them to mobilize their children, 18-year-olds, I consider 18-year-olds kids. You want to mobilize their teenagers. You acknowledge that there's no real expectation that they're really going to do anything militarily in that mobilization, short of getting those people killed. And now they did this buildup just before Joe Biden left, giving all of this money, weapons, et cetera, for an offensive in Kursk. Why are they continuing to double down in Kursk when they seem to be losing more and more territory in the Donbas region? Karahovo has just been liberated or fallen, depending upon your point of view. So they're losing in the area that the main conflict is taking place on the Donbas line, while simultaneously doubling down in Kursk that doesn't really have a military significance. What is going on here? Explain this to us. Make this work for us.
Well, you've asked a very interesting question because even strategists have a hard time figuring out what was the strategy, what was the point. And I think if you're to push this to an extreme, you could say, well, it was to try and gain leverage in any future negotiation. Okay, well, in taking over the Kursk region or invading the Kursk region, which was doomed from the start, not even the Nazis during World War II could achieve that with a full bore war machine. The Ukrainians pulled troops out of the Donbas area, which is precisely the region where the Russians just made a breakthrough this morning. So major breakthrough. So it's you have to ask the question, what's the strategy here? And again, the only conceivable notion is to gain leverage to swap territories, and that's doomed to failure because the Ukrainian troops in the Kursk region, in essence, have been contained. They are and they haven't been killed, but they did lose a considerable number of troops just in the taking of this major city and in the Donbas region, which opens up the territory westward into the rest of Ukraine if Russia so desires. But it does capture the what is a major hub for the Russians and and you have Ukrainian troops contained up in the Kursk Oblast, which is a Russian Federation territory. It's just not going to work. They'll be lucky they can get those troops back alive.
Yeah.
And I think that, just in the Kosovo area, they lost 80% of their troops in that latest onslaught, and captured tremendous amounts of or destroyed a lot of ordnance and armor, and this. I mean, it's armor that they're limited in. And you mentioned the mobilization efforts to sacrifice troops like this. The Ukrainians are desperate for manpower, and they want to get the kids. I'm hearing anywhere from 15 to 18 now. They want to mobilize. This is I think the Ukrainian people, or what's left of them, need to rise up and say, we've had enough of this crap, and do something about it on their own. They've got to take action.
Well, in the Gallup polling, it showed that the majority at this point wanted it to stop. Like literally the majority for the first time said, stop. Even if we have to give up territory, we want it to stop. And I guess my thing is this kind of dichotomy between the main conflict is taking place for Donbas. It's like 1,000-kilometer front. It's everybody understands it in that context. And yet they've doubled down in Kursk. So not only did they go for an offensive, and that offensive has effectively failed, as you point out, they're retained. They continued to do another offensive in Kursk after getting this kind of buildup of weapons from Joe Biden just before he left, like on his way out. It doesn't make sense to me. Like, you are losing. Like, for example, recently, Russia has just taken Karakovo. They've just raised the flag over it in its entirety, which, as you point out, gives them open step. Once they get to Trosk is going to be one of the next main hubs. But after that, it's just open step to the Dnieper. They have to know this. They have to be aware of this. And yet they're still messing around in Kursk, something to which they've already been contained in. I guess they're trying to get a breakthrough from the Russian lines in that case. I don't get the military significance. I just don't. Is it really just negotiations?
As I said, strategists are scratching their heads over it too. I think Blinken, in his comments this morning, conceded that it was to gain leverage for territorial swap. But anytime Blinken opens his mouth, he steps his foot in it. So I think he just should shut up and leave. He's just useless. And but that's just my personal opinion. But but the reality is they're desperate. The Ukrainians are desperate. You even have Zelensky now appealing to Trump to in exchange for the frozen assets of Russian or the interest on frozen assets, Russian assets. He wants to pay for more arms, and he's appealing to the incoming Trump administration to do that. I don't think Trump wants that. He has his designs. He has his priorities elsewhere, and Ukraine certainly is not one of them. He wants to settle it, get it over with, and move on. It's just like he wants to get rid of this problem. He has another focus, and that is on the United States internally, cleaning up internally inside the United States by the mess and the self-inflicted wounds that the Biden administration has imposed upon the American people for the last 4 years. And if you look at his evolving strategy, it is more in our U.S. region. He's looking more in terms of reintroducing, if you will, the notion of a spheres of influence. And Ukraine would be in the Russian sphere of influence, and Greenland, Panama, what's the other place he wants to take over?
Canada. Right.
That is his sphere of influence, and there's active discussion about these things going on. That is his priority, and people say, well, why Greenland? It's just nothing but a hunk of ice. Well, they have not only valuable resources, but Greenland also is a very strategic location. We have bases up in the northern part of Greenland to monitor activities in the Arctic region, and it also is meant to, basically assist in our mutual defense with Canada. So his interests are more in our region as opposed to dealing with questionable wars and ancient wars and in other parts of the world, like in Europe. I mean, we've bailed them out twice. How many more times do we have to do it? And and now they're bringing, and they want to resurrect centuries old alliances and reestablish those alliances. We see that with Poland, with Lithuania. They used to have a joint republic back in the 15th century. Are we going to get involved in that? No. And that's why Poland, for example, latched on to becoming a NATO member. They wanted to use NATO for that purpose. Well, I see NATO fracturing. You're not going to get 32 members of NATO to come up with a unanimous approach on anything any longer. And I think that's why you're going to see the beginning of the end of NATO for sure. And they're going to probably fracture into more regional alliances, defense alliances, like Scandinavian, European, African, and so on.
I want to play this clip because you mentioned it with Zelensky. But I also want to bounce back for a moment to Europe, because Europe, they don't seem to understand that they're being damaged in their association with NATO. It's very weird to me. I mean, first things first, this is Zelensky having this conversation. I mean, there's a few of these clips that are just fantastic. When one of them, they ask him, does Putin love Russia? And he goes on this tirade as if the answer is no. It's very bizarre. But in this case, he's talking about Trump. And he is attacking Biden kind of with a backhand slap as he basically shows fealty and allegiance to Donald Trump.
He was stronger. He was much more stronger than Kamala Harris, Biden first, and then Kamala Harris. Yes, he showed that he can intellectually and physically. It was an important point to show that if you want to have a strong country, you have to be strong. And he was strong. And this number of rallies, what I said, is not a simple thing. He showed that he can. He is strong. So he doesn't have any questions with this age and etc. Nothing. He is young. He is young here, and his brains work. So I think it's important.
He's young. Sorry. He's young here, and his brains work. That I didn't realize that was an issue, but now clearly this is aimed at Joe Biden, effectively saying Joe Biden is not quite in his right mind. And look, man, he is. I would imagine that they are going to have to use surgery to remove his lips off of Trump's ass. Because he is clearly kissing ass in this interview.
Oh yeah, there's no question about it. Yeah, I agree with you. He's trying to butter up now. He recognizes that the torch is passed with respect to Biden. Yep. Biden came through for him. I mean, to date, the United States has provided some $300 billion in military and financial assistance to Ukraine. That's a sizable chunk of change. Yeah. And yet it wasn't enough. And combined with the other allied countries of NATO, it just wasn't enough. It clearly showed that his strategy was inept. That I mean, even if he was going to go to war, to even contemplate that against the Russian Federation was folly in the first place. But now to do this and cater. I mean, the man lacks authority. He's under martial law. His term had expired as president. Mm-hmm. He and the Russians refused to negotiate with him personally because of his legal standing in the Ukrainian government. So they're going to have to do something. That's why I'm saying it's time for the Ukrainian people to take the initiative and make things right, to try to settle this thing once and for all. And that means that they need on their own to settle this thing. Otherwise, it's going to take an out. I presume they want the United States to come in and plant another government that will be doomed to failure, because all of our regime change efforts to date, from Libya to Afghanistan to Iraq, have failed. So if this is what they want, I think it's folly, and we need to move on and shut it down and move on.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that part too, because there was something that Zelensky said in relation to that one also, where he's saying that effectively this interview was weird because, for one, he's speaking in 3 different languages. He's speaking in English, Ukrainian, and Russian. He doesn't seem to speak in Ukrainian well, so he keeps going back to Russian in regards to the way he's giving the speech. So right off the bat, it's a little bit strange. In this case, though, he's talking about Trump, effectively saying that world leaders look to Trump. Again, surgically remove his lips from Trump's ass. That world leaders are looking at Trump for some level of idea on what is going to take place in the world. Now, that's astonishing when you think about it. Like, he is in the middle of a war, and he is effectively admitting that this is going to be something they're going to have to go to Trump in order to resolve, that he is not master of his own domain in the context of the war. That by itself is a pretty heavy admission. But I want to get your take on what he's saying.
It won't be long.
About how, I think I'm paraphrasing, but they look to him and he looks to the US, or something to that effect. But I want to get your take on this commentary.
Because Europe will be looking at us and will be looking at Trump. And by the way, I now see that when I talk about something with Donald Trump, whether we meet in person or we just have a call, all the European leaders always ask, how was it? This shows the influence of Donald Trump. And this has never happened before. With an American president, I tell you, from my experience.
You know, what's wild about this clip, and I think the most maybe disturbing thing about the clip, under normal circumstances, and I want to get your take on it, under normal circumstances, when a country is at war, that country themselves are making decisions about what's in their best interests for the war. And when you get to a certain point where they're like, okay, we can't proceed, we can't win this, we're going to stop because we're trying to save our own people, we're going to save the territory that we have and come to some kind of agreement and some kind of a deal. Zelensky is not in a position to make that deal. And not just not in a position, when he wanted to make the deal for the Istanbul agreements, he was not allowed to make that deal by Western forces led by Boris Johnson coming into the country representing, of course, America in doing so. And to make it even worse, even now, if you notice, he says, well, Europe looks to us and we look to America. Basically, America is going to be the end all be all in whether or not the war continues or the war stops. But think about what that means, though. That means that a country that is not your own is making decisions on your own people's life and death issues. Whereas the Ukrainians may at a certain point want to stop because it's not in their best interest to continue. Well, we are the ones who are making the choice, not Ukrainians. This is not about whether or not this is in America's best interest for Americans to fight. This is whether or not it's in America's best interest for Ukraine to keep fighting. That's a weird dynamic on the battlefield. Give me your take on that. I mean, do you agree or disagree with that, first of all?
No, I think I think he has conceded defeat without saying so. He's almost like a dog who is put on its back and shows its belly and concedes. I mean, in a dog fight. I mean, this is. I mean, he now realizes that following the advice of the Europeans brought him to the point where he is now, and also the Europeans can no longer support him. So where else do you turn? To the United States, because they remain the superpower. And but Trump has another agenda, as I pointed out earlier. The reality is that Europe itself will not be able to do anything to assist him, and I think he's basically conceding that, and he's appealing for U.S. support, but it's too little, too late, and the United States gave what it could in association with other NATO countries to back him up, but he failed. He failed it because the Biden administration for the last 4 years left it up to the Zelensky to figure out how to conduct that war. and that was a total disaster, and he lacked basic elements. For example, air power. If he was going to fight a war, you want to have your air power. He didn't have the air power, and so he resorted to drones, which is a poor substitute. Although it's like bad. It's like swatting mosquitoes with these drones. It's not like being bombed with 500-pound bombs from an F-16. You know, it's different, and you need, and it allowed Russia to bring in its heavy armor, and being in the middle of winter now, the territory that the frozen land is ideal for them to start moving that and to move their troops in, and also you use air power to bomb minefields. I mean, Russia had the luxury of the time to lay out miles of mines for the tanks against the Ukrainians, and they just lost 80% of their armor in this latest fiasco in the Donbas. I mean, it's just it's suicide, and they again, the Ukrainian people need to say enough, and the Europeans have already basically telegraphing that. They're saying enough, because they are just about out of storage of their own natural gas and basic resources. They don't have the industrial capacity and infrastructure to switch over to a war production. They just don't have it.
Yeah, they can do it if they wanted to.
And it's going to take them a generation. It's going to take them a generation to recover from what they have lost now in terms of the quality of life, and the people themselves are against continuing this thing, because they see that it's not amounting to anything. It's actually driving them greater and greater into economic upheaval.
Right. So why do European leaders continue with this nonsense then? I mean,
it's the leaders. The people. The leadership has one set of ideas. The people have another. It's up to the people now, and we're seeing this in Europe with the rise of more of the the right wing types coming in, and they're gaining popularity. And if short of a violent revolution, if they can do it through the ballot box, that's probably going to be the answer. But clearly, Trump has shown more of a brought back the populist notion, and the Europeans want the same thing. They're beginning to show that, you know what, this effort is futile, and they need to take charge of their own destiny, in effect, rather than just worrying about Ukraine. They got to worry about themselves now because of their economic and political plight.
Is Russia going to attack the oil pipelines? Ukraine has stopped oil going to Europe. They've effectively saying, well, this is no longer going to take place. We're not going to renew the contracts. So Europe is now going without Russian oil coming through Ukraine. Apparently there's another one going through, Yamal pipeline in Turkey. But for all intents and purposes, for the Ukrainian pipelines, it has stopped. And Europe is going to have to somehow make up the oil or the gas that they're going to miss. They're going to pay it.
I don't think they'll attack them. I don't think they'll attack the pipelines because they see that again as a source of future revenue gain. And Putin has basically signaled as much that he wants them to reconsider and start getting back on track and be smart about it and start getting cheaper oil and gas and get off this kick of trying to dominate or take over or bust up the Russian Federation. It is not going to happen. Having been to Russia twice last year, and spoken to Russian people, they are more solid than ever behind Putin.
Do you think that we can ever go back to that norm? Or do you think, meaning, because the U.S. has a clear interest in this, right? I mean, from one point of view, we didn't like the idea that there was pipelines connecting Europe to Russia. We wanted them to buy our gas, not the Russian gas. We were able to blow up Nord Stream, so we were able to accomplish that. We were able to poison the relationship between Europe and between Russia, So that, again, also was an accomplishment. All of these things were American objectives that were not in the interests of Europe, but the European leaders still went along with it under this kind of fig leaf of Ukraine. Do you think they get back to common sense? Or do you think, no, we're in a new era where there's this kind of bifurcation of the world between Eastern and Western spheres? What are your thoughts?
I think inevitably there is that division. It will remain. We've had to bail Europe out of 2 wars already, and they just seem to have a suicidal bent on engagement and historically against Russia. The history of the UK against Russia goes back centuries, and we've discussed that. They've also and it goes back to the days when there was a British Empire. Particularly such as in Central Asia, when they were competing for influence in that region, and the UK has never forgiven the Russians. Has never forgiven the Russians for that, and as a consequence, this animosity continues. And as I may have said, I keep telling some of my British friends, look, you guys still think you're an empire, but larger than the state of Indiana.
I know.
And
you're this tiny little country.
Crazy. Yeah. It's crazy. It's crazy. They've got to get their mind into the 21st century rather than the 18th and 17th centuries, and get back into the 21st century and consider where they are right now, because they have a lot now of catching up to do as a result of supporting this war. And also, the world is more dangerous because of the existence now of hypersonic missiles, which give them warning times of like 3 to 5 minutes.
Yeah, it's a different world.
It is. And I think Putin has really been restrained and is waiting for Trump to come on board. They will talk. There's no question about it. They will talk. You raised another interesting point on trust. The Russians don't trust the West and the United States in particular. It was under Trump, frankly, that they sustained most of the sanctions and lost property that they purchased in the United States. This is and they've told me in the past they really despise being talked down to. They want to be treated as an equal strategic partner. And I think that But you got Trump now bringing in the likes of Kellogg and Ortega once again. I mean, it just never ends. He's got to get rid of these neocons. These neocons are the ones who are pushing this narrative of not only supporting Netanyahu, but also supporting the containment of Russia, rather than treating them as an equal partner and working things out with them.
Russia wants,
we have to rebuild that trust. We have to rebuild that trust. And I think in Trump's second administration, he'll have that ability if he chooses to do so, because he no longer has hanging over his head the conspiracy hoaxes of Russian collusion for getting voted in and all that crap. He had to deal with that during that time period when he sanctioned Russia, in order to show that he didn't have that that closeness with Russia.
Yeah, it came within context.
And it hurt our relationship as a consequence.
I'm curious. I mean, Russia seems to want a new security architecture of Europe, not just the end to the war. And it's like the war ending, all of that stuff gets lumped into, okay, what is the new security architecture of Europe? Do you think they're going to get that? Meaning, do you think whatever this end to this war is, that will be by definition this kind of new security architecture and a platform to build a relationship?
I think it's inevitable to happen. As I pointed out, I think it's got to begin with the fracturing of NATO. I think the reality is that Trump coming on board says that in exchange for us to remain in NATO, you've got now to come up with 5% of your GDP to support yourself. They can't do it. They can't even do 2%. Many of them can't do. Most of them cannot do 2%. Some can do 3%, and certainly not 5%. The United States has been providing around 5% at least of GDP. So, and we can no longer support them because of our own financial issues that we have to deal with here. Yeah, 36 trillion. How do you pay that off? and there's going to be opposition. And it really is the beginning of the end for the United States if we can't cope with this and deal with it effectively and do it now. I mean, I hope it's not too late.
One last question before I let you go. HTS. Syria has gotten far more complicated in regards to the political relationships that have developed in Syria. And one of the most interesting ones has to do with this kind of relationship between Turkey and HTS, especially in the context of the Kurds, and for that matter, Lebanon. Because there's an expectation from people that I've spoken to on the ground that the moment that the ceasefire, and I'm putting that in quotes because Israel hasn't necessarily honored the ceasefire at all,
right.
But the moment that that ceasefire is over with, that hostilities are going to erupt almost immediately right off the bat. And that the concern is that Lebanon is sandwiched between HTS, in one sense, a group of jihadists that have been doing these kind of border incursions into Lebanon, and Israel itself. Give me your take on this. I mean, this seems to be somewhat of a,
we're headed for a larger clash, if you will. Turkey cannot control HTS. HTS has told PKK, put down your arms. That satisfies Turkey on the one hand, but on the other hand, the clash ultimately, and Turkey cannot control HTS and Jelani, even though he's trying to give the outward appearance of wanting to be part of the international community. But
right.
There are so many factions within his group that it's a question of time whether they'll effectively be able to hold on to them. The other thing is the real clash ultimately, I think, will come between Turkey and Israel. Turkey is once again, because of its neo-Ottoman vision, will clash over much of the same territory as the Greater Israel concept that Netanyahu is professing. So I think that we have and also now he's taking the opportunity to talk once again, Netanyahu is, of going after Iran. He wants to drag the United States into bombing Iran, and he's got to he wants to get Trump locked in on that. I don't think Trump is going to go along with that. I hope not, because that will makes this a much larger regional conflict as a consequence, not just between them. And the Gulf Arab countries have been silent until now. But the one thing they don't want is Israel taking over all these lands. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, they don't want to live under another neo-Ottoman empire. So we got to see which direction they go. I think we need to watch what Saudi Arabia decides and says to Trump ultimately, because they still want a two-state solution for Palestine, and they want to get back to the 67 borders. Israel is against that. If they want normalization, it's not going to happen. So I think that the clashes are yet to come.
Does Saudi Arabia really want a two-state solution? I mean, like, I get the sense that the leadership doesn't care one way or the other. It's just political.
Well, that's what they're insisting on. They're insisting on it now. Before the October 7th, when you did the Abraham Accords, Palestine wasn't even in the discussion.
Right.
But now it is. It's now prominent. It's now because of the slaughter and the extermination that the Israelis did of the Palestinians. You've got all the Arab countries sympathetic to the Palestinians in that regard. They can't ignore it. They just cannot ignore it.
We will see. I don't get this. I don't know. I don't get the sense that they care. I mean, but you could be right. I mean, like you said, in the Abraham Accords, it wasn't a factor. But with the amount of bloodshed, maybe it's gotten to the point where the leadership is we
have seen a complete change in the political dynamic throughout the Middle East. Netanyahu changed everything. We're in an open, uncharted area now. All of the methods in the past of containing this or that, of trying to restrain other countries from going into warfare, have all been obliterated. We got a whole new concept now that's underway in the Middle East, and we just have to see how these players play. Turkey is going to be key, but Turkey is also aligned very closely with Russia and through Russia, Iran, and because if Iran is attacked, I think the Russians will intervene as a consequence.
One last question: on the issue of, well, I'll kill it. I'll stop it here because I'm going to go down a rabbit hole.
Maybe another time. Huh?
Yeah, Michael, man, thank you for this. I really do appreciate it. Michael Maloof, he's a former senior policy analyst in the Office of Secretary of Defense. He's also a regular contributing analyst on RT and other media outlets. He has nearly 30 years of federal service experience in the U.S. Department of Defense and is a good friend of this show, man. Thank you for this. You have a good day, all right?
You too. Thanks, Jamal.
All right. Michael Maloof, man of the hour. He knows this stuff, man. He has covered this stuff for years, and I always appreciate him joining us on the show. The only other question I was going to go into had to do, these relationships have gotten far weirder in regards to Syria. And you have a lot of what seems to be these kind of groups, whether it was the Alawites, the Christians, some of the other Muslim groups, they're being marginalized by various groups that have taken over Syria at this point. HTS is just one group of many. And there's a question about whether or not they're going to be able to control this territory. They have told the Kurds to put down their arms. Will they do that? Doesn't seem like it up to this point. But, you know, everybody that we brought on up to this point has pointed out the situation to which Syria finds itself and how it's calamitous, to put it mildly, and nobody knows necessarily where it's going to go. For that matter, nobody knew it was going to fall and collapse in the way that it did. So we are in uncharted territory. That is going to be the great title for that video, Uncharted Territory. Yeah, that's no other way to put it. My next guest will be on shortly. We have joining us Patrick, where is it? There we are. Patrick Henningsen. I think this is the first time I've had him on the show, so that should be a pretty good conversation. He works for, I'm sorry, I'm doing two things at once. Somebody said you need an engineer. Yeah, so he's a geopolitical journalist and host of, I think that's a Sunday Wire, former TNT critic of mainstream media propaganda, 21st Century Wire, I believe is what it's called. He had this great article out, and he was having this conversation about Elon Musk, because now that Elon Musk owns Twitter, Musk can do whatever he wants with it. And what we've seen is that under this guise of free speech, which, again, I don't hate the fact that he's opened Twitter up where more conversation can take place. That is true. But Musk has ran Twitter almost like, you know, a popular vote. Hey, would you guys like this person to come back? Give me a yay or nay. As opposed to having a company where you have just policy and you let the policy dictate what the company does. He has a huge influence in Twitter. Now, he would say he doesn't touch the algorithm. Okay, that may or may not be true. I don't know that. But I would say that he has such an influence in the typical affairs of the application and the things that he says that people couldn't come away from it thinking that he does have more influence and he is exerting that influence. I mean, after all, if you know that Elon Musk owns Twitter and you work for Twitter, are you going to do anything that departs from what his wishes are, even if he doesn't necessarily explicitly tell you those wishes? This is kind of the Jeff Bezos thing, owning Washington Post or any person owning a particular publication. Are you going to really report anything bad about the person who owns the publication? And do you think you're going to keep your job after you do such a thing? And when we have something like Twitter where it's social media, it's even weirder. Very rarely do you get Jeff Bezos putting out an article in his own publication. And yet you have Elon Musk destroying Twitter as a Galactus for any particular commentary, especially on things that he himself advocates for. Now, the H-1B1 thing is one of the things that, of course, comes up in that conversation, in that argument, because Elon Musk wants to gut the American worker, put in indentured servants in order to take the place of those American workers, and in order to pay those people much, much less and drop the amount that Americans make in regards to their tech jobs. Now, interestingly enough, elements of the right have pushed back on this. Now, all of these Democrats who claim that there is no such thing as being able to work with the right wing and that there's nothing that we agree upon, those people, that's nonsense. This issue points that out. There are issues of agreement that the left and the right can come to some kind of consensus and agreement on in order to move forward. Workers' rights is one of those things. Obviously, if it wasn't, you wouldn't be having this fight taking place over the H-1B1 visa thing. Again, the issue that I break on this has to do with this idea of what it means to be a nationalist. And from my point of view, being a nationalist meaning represents the best interests of your own population. I think that in regards to healthcare, meaning I want Americans to be as healthy as possible. I want us to be the most healthiest people on the planet. So there's that. Education. I want us to be able to self-actualize, meaning I want you to be able to go to school. If you want a doctorate, God bless you. If you got the intellectual chops to get it, God bless you. Go get your doctorate and we will support you for it because it is in our best interest as a country for you to get that doctorate. We are in an arms race on intellectual capability in regards to industry, economics, and for that matter, scientific. And you should want people to go to school to get the best education that they could possibly get, knowing full well that that is to the betterment of your country as you are competing in this kind of global environment, in this global world. For whatever particular reason, I, as a nationalist, lefty, come to that assessment. The people on the right would come to a similar argument of, yes, we need to care for American workers, but we also need to get rid of the Department of Education. So it's like in one sense, we supposedly go with this idea that we care about American workers and we want these American workers to take these high-tech jobs, and we believe that the tech field is lying. But simultaneously, we want to destroy the device that allows the Americans to be in the position in the first place. It is a very weird, contradictory argument that they make. But at the very least, they seem to have this notion of America first means America first. At least some of them do. I want to bring in my guest, though. We are joined with the one and only, I believe this might be the first time I've spoken to you, Patrick Henningsen, or at the very least I've spoken to you on my channel. Mm-hmm. He is a geopolitical analyst, journalist, and host of, and please tell me, it's sundaywire.com. Am I getting it right?
Yeah, the website is 21stcenturywire.com. That's our media platform. And the Sunday show is called The Sunday Wire, which has been going for about 10 years. It's a long-running podcast.
Excellent. 21st. See, I know of you from 21st Century Wire. I know of you from the articles. I didn't know about the network, but just so the audience will know it. Thank you. So they'll be aware of it. And I'm going to give an outro also, giving a heads up for the article and for the media publication. I mean, I can't get my words up this morning, for the internet show itself. Thank you for this.
The last time we spoke, Jamal, I think was on fault lines.
It was.
A few years ago, yeah.
Yeah, the government has gotten involved and has effectively done an end run around the First Amendment. But Britain, you would know of that yourself. What is Richard Medhurst? They've been going after him. I saw an old man that the cops apparently showed up to for annoying somebody online.
Yeah, Craig Murray. The list goes on and on.
Just
lots of journalists on special issues, of course, being the Middle East, Israel and Palestine being quite inflammatory in the eyes of the government. So we hope that situation gets resolved because we need good freedom of the press and good reporting and good transparency and a great dialogue. This is the mark of a successful society and civilization. So we got to preserve the
argument that taking place in Britain over that, because like you said, you don't have a First Amendment in the UK, and we have things like a D notice that they can put the kibosh on certain stories. They say that they don't have to follow, but the media typically follows them. And as you point out, the pressure that they're putting on the various journalists in the UK that they don't necessarily like. And even recently, there were publications, I believe it was either the Gray Zone or the Cradle, was pointing out how there's a gatekeeper in the BBC that puts the kibosh on various stories that they don't necessarily like on the issue of Gaza, or for that matter, on the issue of Israel. What is going on in the UK in regards to media? And is there a fight actively taking place over this notion of media freedom?
This is an ongoing situation. I mean, Britain doesn't have a written constitution like the United States. Doesn't have a Bill of Rights. Everything's done by precedent law, by court decisions and legal precedents and things like that. So the issue of rights takes time to kind of grind out, if you will, over history and time through the courts. Like, for instance, David Miller, incredible academic from University of Bristol, he was dismissed from his position under pressure, ostensibly probably from the Israeli lobby, among others, but because he took a position as an academic that anti-Zionism was an important thing for students to understand, and that the history of Zionism is also important, and it's okay to be anti-Zionist because you're opposing the colonial settler state of Israel. But he was dismissed on anti-Semitism grounds. So he won a landmark tribunal case just this past year, which is becomes legal precedent in a way. I don't know to what degree, that case is going to affect other cases. But if somebody now will be arrested or lose their job or something along similar lines, they can then point to that decision. And that holds unless it's overturned or unless it's appealed. So it's this constant. It's a little bit. I mean, myself as well as an American, I really appreciate the fact that the United States does have a written Bill of Rights, because it's really a backstop, especially for the First Amendment. And that's really, I mean, if you think about it, Jamal, you guys know it's the most important amendment.
It's like number one. It's the first one for a reason, right?
Yeah. Everything else stems from the First Amendment. All your other rights are, so it's complicated, but it's a different system. It's a constitutional monarchy. The monarch is only symbolic. Really, the monarch has been mediatized for decades now, so it is a symbolic head of state. But the gears of institutions and the legal institutions and political institutions still moving, still constantly having to iron these things out. Some people will say if it's left in its purest form, it's a very good system. But over time, institutions become corrupted. The House of Lords is no longer a check on the other houses the way that used to be. So it's become more politicized under Tony Blair. Likewise, you could say the same about the United States government. You have the judiciary can be quite politicized, depending on who's been in power the longest. And then the Senate, the Congress, they have their built-in problems institutionally because of the money that's been pouring into the U.S. system through lobbyists. It's a totally different political system than the one that was initially designed. So you have to. It's hard to iron these things out. It takes generations.
They get better and better at being corrupt over the course of time.
And
they find ways to kind of, how can we exploit a particular system?
Like the French have their problems too. They have inherent problems. Italy, because of the design and how Germany, because of how their parliamentary system is designed, they have these built-in issues and problems that are starting to emerge over time. And it's every country has these different challenges.
I want to move to Elon Musk for a bit. I guess I have two questions. Just for spend 5 seconds on this. If the Queen tomorrow decided to start asserting authority, what would happen?
The King.
Or the King. Well, yes, correct. I'm sorry. The Queen is dead. Right. The Queen is dead. Right. I'm sorry. The King. Yes, King Charles. If he decided tomorrow to be like, you know what, I'm going to start flexing powers. What happens? Parliament just takes away his powers? How does that work?
I don't think that it's impossible. I think it's just there is no more power for the monarch in day-to-day political life. It's if he comes out and becomes more vocal in the press to try to influence things through public statements on issues, then the monarch then has a risk. There could be a huge backlash. And then that could damage the institution and legitimacy of what's left of the monarchy. You see, so they have the self-preservation gene as well that they need to look after.
Yeah.
So they'd be very careful, and you see this through history when the monarch weighs in on certain issues. Sometimes it's not acceptable to the general public or the political establishment.
Oh, that's
So
fascinating.
it's a
God,
fine
that's
line.
fascinating.
It's a delicate dance. It's a delicate dance. Yeah.
Because, the reality of it is we don't have this overarching thing. Like, there's nothing over the president. And that's good and that's bad in some respects. I mean, at the very least, the monarch is supposed to be impartial. And because he's impartial, if anything is going on, you would expect the monarch has this capability of kind of righting the ship in a way that we don't have any faculty to right the ship. Everybody is political in that process, including the courts, which makes it, it's hard to tell where the floor is. But I want to go to Musk real quick while we have time. Musk, give me your take on him. Because right now, the Grok thing is in the news where people are asking Grok effectively, like, what is their number? And many people are getting this very low number. Also, you have a situation where people who are arguing over the H1B1 is saying that Musk is using Twitter to silence them. Now, Musk is saying, I don't touch the algorithm. I don't have anything to do with it. But he's so loud and vocal on every issue. I mean, he's been going after the German government, after the British government. He's been giving his take on all of this stuff. People have a belief that the algorithm is not separate from what Elon Musk and himself wants, especially around this notion of censorship and censoring point of views that Elon Musk doesn't necessarily like. Give me your take on this, because this is one of the posts that I saw you write on and I got intrigued by it. What are your thoughts?
But my feelings on Elon Musk have changed a lot in the last couple of years. Myself and many others are extremely grateful that he took on the responsibility of buying Twitter, because I was banned for life by Jack Dorsey and his team of censorship henchmen and women, and all the government plants that Jack Dorsey allowed in Twitter, from the FBI, the CIA, the DHS, the NSA. It's just crawling with spooks and political operatives who were engaged in mass censorship. And for that, Jack Dorsey should go down in history as just really a character of derision.
Agreed.
And a complete failure in terms of what his public persona was, and all about, communication and connecting people. But really, he allowed Twitter to become a corrupt sort of cesspit of three-letter agency. Manipulation of narratives, and to defend foreign policy that was clearly failing, to defend the Russiagate hoax, for instance, to decide who's going to win election, who's going to lose. So that's what the previous regime at Twitter did. So I was banned for life. I even got an email from them saying, don't even try to log in on another.
Did you?
Yeah, because we have your IP addresses, I think was what they're insinuating, that account will be nuked for life. So like I wasn't allowed to be. And my sin, if there was one, was that I questioned the COVID vaccine, and I questioned the science behind what they were claiming about the Delta variant. Right. And I was really publishing I posted other people's articles, you see. So I didn't even give my explicit opinion, but because I shared articles from other journalists.
And that was enough.
Yeah. And one of them was about danger to women who were pregnant, the experimental mRNA jab. So, but there are other things where I was scored, and I learned that I was on other lists when the Twitter files were released, and I was in the Twitter files. Whoa. And I was put on a list of Russian disinformation threats. Yeah. So
that's so insulting. I mean, like, because they do that nonsense for Karl Gorgetsky, they do it for Fico, they do it for all, like, anybody who comes off as, I want what's in the best interest of my country, and being involved in a war might not be in the best interest of my country. And it's like, well, that guy's clearly working with the Russians.
Yeah.
It's so outrageous.
Yeah, you can't have your own independent thoughts. I mean, it's impossible that you, Jamal Thomas, could come up with your own ideas about what wars are good, bad, and what's not working. And what's it not in the American interest or the European interest, and so the NATO interest or whatever, or even oppose NATO as
Right.
as an institution. So those were things you were allowed to do previous generations, but now in the social media hive mind environment that's very carefully micromanaged from behind the scenes through algorithms and things like that, a lot of these things are officially or unofficially verboten. So when Musk took over, I then, after I think it took about 3 months, I got an email. So I was banned for almost a year and a half. And I learned as well through the Senate hearings, when Josh Hawley was presenting information on this, when they're grilling Zuckerberg,
Maybe, yeah.
there was a dashboard that the big tech companies shared amongst themselves: Google, YouTube, Meta, Facebook, Twitter, and the others. And so I'm clearly, if I was on the Hamilton 68 dashboard and they were all using that, then so that's why I'm banned and getting rolling bans from Facebook just from posting, and on YouTube rolling strikes, even though I'm not able to post much content. So I'm clearly I was on that shared dashboard. So I was being censored across all the platforms. So when Musk took over, I got an email after 3 months from his team saying, "Go ahead, your account's been reactivated." So I was happy. I lodged an appeal, so they must have finally read it after 2 years, and saw that it made sense. A long, exhaustive appeal. I consulted a lawyer as well on that issue, and I really believe that Twitter under Dorsey would see common sense and logic and realize that I've been screwed, by their machine. So when Musk came back, I applied. I got my account reinstated. Took a while. There were some problems to get it active again. Finally got it active. So from that point of view, I'm grateful that he did that. And there's so many other journalists that were also banned that came back on. So fair enough. And I've publicly credited him for that, and I've constantly reiterated that I am grateful for that. However, I've noticed behavior patterns in Musk that are very disturbing, especially in recent months. So he has effectively bought his way into politics, and he has also gamed his rise as an influencer because he owns the platform. He's force fed into everybody's feed.
Yes.
So I even unfollowed him. And then suddenly I just checked the other day and I'm following him again. Like I didn't do that voluntarily. So that was kind of strange. But
I blocked him, by the way.
You blocked him.
Everybody,
whether you like it or not, you're going to get force fed Elon Musk's worldview in your Twitter feed. So that's how he amassed 200 million followers. And so he will then boost and retweet people that he agrees with and ideas he has a very narrow band of political thought.
Yes.
Which is at the moment, it could change, but at the moment it's anti-immigration, anti-Muslim, anti-Islam, and pro-Israel. Although he doesn't overtly come out pro-Israeli anymore, he has completely backed off because the backlash he received from that is substantial. So he doesn't want to deal with the flack on that. So, but it seems that the Israeli lobby, who has funded an Israeli interest from the beginning of Tommy Robinson's career. Tommy Robinson is a type of political actor in the UK who his real name is Stephen Yaxley Lennon, but he goes by a stage name, which is bizarre in itself. He has a stage name like an actor would, so it's Tommy Robinson is the name, but his real name is Stephen Yaxley Lennon.
How weird.
He's basically a political provocateur, a race hustler, and his job is to gin up division. And he's been backed by Israeli and lobby interests from the beginning of the English Defense League. Okay, so from those days, and a very divisive character used by the tabloid media in the UK, by Rupert Murdoch's press, to play that role, to divide Christians and Muslims, and to get people to kind of have a lot of tension ethnically and so forth. So the immigration issue is a big issue. Let's be honest. Whether you're in America or whether you're in Europe or the UK or Ireland, especially, massive influx and flows of migrants. In the case of Ireland, forced flows have kind of disrupted social harmony on different levels. Okay, and the government hasn't really been forthcoming with what's underpinning this policy. So that's obviously going to create a lot of tension and distrust and unhappiness among certain sections of the public, and especially the indigenous sections of the public. Those who regard themselves as, white Europeans are especially going to be very upset. So they want answers. They want something to be done. They want some kind of policy shift on this. That's understandable. That's a real issue. In fact, going into any election, especially in the West, immigration will be one of the most emotive issues. And this is according to pollsters. So going into any national election, the three issues that usually evoke the most emotion and will swing an election are the economy is number one. Number two is immigration. Number three is war. Or if your country's engaged in some kind of war and so forth. So terrorism, domestic terrorism, that can also swing an election in the run up to an election if it's right before. So immigration is number one. And the problem is this issue has been weaponized by political parties in recent years. So we can have a bigger conversation about it. I'm more interested in the broad analysis of economics, the flow of people. I'm also interested in how foreign policy decisions, i.e. NATO actions, trigger inflow of migrants from Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, as an example. So that's a conversation that's not allowed in Europe. You're not allowed to talk about NATO.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I never understood. I fundamentally never understood Europe on this issue because my ex was from Austria. And I would have this conversation with her, like, why are you guys okay? Like, these are American wars, like the Syrian conflict. We inspired the conflict, the Libyan conflict. We were sitting and paying for these jihadists in these various areas in order to topple these governments. And you support us on this, even though it's destabilizing your politics. Do you not understand that what America is doing is directly and adversely affecting your countries? And she would be like, what do you mean? Like, you just don't, it's invisible.
She doesn't see it. She doesn't see it. And the average European doesn't see it as supporting America. America has convinced Europe that it's their fight, that it's their interest, that it's a NATO issue, and that they are duty bound or they're obligated to act under the NATO banner to topple this evil dictator or reinstall democracy in Libya. Obviously, they smashed Libya to pieces. It's a failed state. And what happened with Libya was then it opened up basically the safety valve for sub-Saharan immigration through Africa into Europe, Southern Europe, Greece, Italy, and so forth. So it was a disaster. And Muammar Gaddafi himself, the former head of Libya, he warned about this. He said, we are the last, stop for Europe in terms of we are keeping the migrant flows in check.
He was right.
He was absolutely right. And now the EU, it's just like the EU is literally funding mass migration because the money that they give, like Sudan, for instance, to stem the flow of migration, it's invariably probably falling into the hands of human trafficking organizations. So the EU is indirectly probably end up funding through corruption and so forth the flow of migrants in a syndicate that stretches from Sudan all the way to the Mediterranean coast. So, and including the boats and the whole business of transporting people in America with the southern border, the similar issues with the cartels making human trafficking one of the most profitable forms of vice and crime, more than drugs in some cases. So, and nobody wants to address that issue too much because I guess it's just not one of those issues that's easily digestible from a political point of view. So,
Trump on the head. I mean, but in Europe, I don't quite get it. I never understood how Europe was okay with that because they would complain about migrants all the time.
Yep.
Yeah, please.
All day long. So they don't want to join the dots on that because it becomes complicated. So because it's complicated and because then the media and certain political forces can capture this issue and turn it into a binary issue. and it'll be a black-white issue, or it'll be a Africa versus Europe issue, or a culture war issue, or a Muslim versus Christian issue. And so the political actors that profit and benefit from this will use this as a domestic divisive issue. And this has happened throughout history in different ways. Is scapegoating migrants has always been a convenient sort of outlet, because there's no government that doesn't like this, because the more that people are fighting each other and they're not scrutinizing and auditing their own government and its shortcomings, then the regime, whether it's a monarchy or a quote democracy or whatever, they're happy that the people are at each other's throats and not their throat. So that's the case. So this type of rhetoric serves a purpose. So it's also a route into power for certain political factions that cynically use this type of an issue, even if it is a real issue, but then it metastasizes and becomes a culture issue. It can become ugly throughout history. It can end in pogroms. We saw what happened in Nazi Germany, for instance, in other places like this in Eastern Europe. So this is what's happening now. And Elon Musk, in his infinite wisdom, he's delving into politics, and he's feeling the power. And he believes, and I'm not speculating, it's pretty clear from his tweets, he believes that with his thumb and his smartphone, that he can dismiss party leaders in the UK, he can delegitimize a government in Germany, and so forth. I'm the biggest critic, long-running critic.
Here.
I've been more critical and more intelligently critical on all these issues than Elon Musk has. He just only recently became enlightened enough to comment on them, but he's not. With regards to these issues, the tweets that Elon Musk is doing are exactly the same as billionaire Bill Ackman, exactly the same as Barry Weiss, exactly the same as they're running. It was that infamous WhatsApp group that we learned about after October 7th. So Elon Musk is clearly in this circular. They're all tweeting the same thing, which is free Tommy Robinson. And Muslims are raping white, the mass rape of Britain, as Elon Musk is calling it. And he's calling for Parliament to be dissolved in Britain. He's calling for Keir Starmer to be thrown out. Now he's turning on the right. He wants Nigel Farage to be ousted.
What's he got $50 million if they get rid of Farage or something?
He's dangling money. So and then he's calling for the German government to be chucked as well. And so he's feeling the power from his Twitter hand. But it's like it's not a level playing field. He's got his thumb on the scale of his influence on one of the biggest social media platforms, and that's highly unethical. And there's a moral and ethical issue. So we're looking at a person here where we're questioning whether he has any real morals or any ethics. He says that he is his only religion, he said, a paraphrase, that the relentless, dogged pursuit of the truth. And it's a great platitude. When you're doing an interview with some mainstream media outlet or something like that. But the reality is he's lying. He's publicly misleading the public on why Tommy Robinson, Stephen Yaxley Lennon, is in jail in the UK. Elon Musk is saying he's a journalist who's in jail for exposing grooming gangs, Muslim grooming gangs, preying on little white children in the UK. That's not why Tommy Robinson's in jail. He's in jail for contempt of court because he meddled into a case to try to get a journalistic scoop. Tommy fancies himself as a journalist, and he delved into the wrong story and got himself into a whole world of trouble. And instead of basically backing out, he doubled down, and he called on his mob and his crowd and his supporters to support him in doubling down on this losing gambit to defame a Syrian refugee named Jamal.
Yeah, I remember this.
And so he violated court orders, and it's effectively it'll be like jury tampering in America, or perverting the course of justice. So he was done for contempt. I think he pleaded guilty, and so he got put into prison. But his supporters and Elon Musk are saying he has been imprisoned. He's a journalist in prison for exposing Muslim rape gangs. Right? It's a total lie. And so Elon Musk, who is supposedly his religion is pursuing the truth, didn't bother to read the court complaint for Tommy Robinson. I mean, so that tells you what Elon Musk might be a brilliant rocket scientist. He might be a great engineer. He's clearly a brilliant entrepreneur, and he can make a buck. Okay, he can turn a buck, and he's looks like a competent CEO, and he's managed to make Tesla very successful by writing a green agenda, which a lot of people on his new sort of home on the right would call a green scam. But people, they forgive you when you're coming with a bag of $100 million.
Right.
But so he was a Democrat, a extreme neoliberal, and he refashioned himself in the last 12 months as a conservative. So in the last 18 months, first as a free speech champion, and from that he got bona fides on the right, and understandably so, across all sorts of spectrums post-COVID. Very traumatic time for society. People are looking for heroes and people to come to the rescue of the basic principles of American and Western democracy. And Elon Musk positioned himself as that person. But then once he got that position and power, he's become something else. And clearly in this case, he's become a tool of Israeli interests, because that Tommy Robinson is an asset of Israel. So that racial tension, the anti-Islamic agenda, the anti-Muslim hate, this is something Israel relies on, because their whole sales pitch to the UK and to the US and Europe is, we're fighting the fight here to, kill Muslims, kill Palestinians, so they don't come over to you. We're dealing with them here. So we're going to keep them out of Europe, from tainting the West. And they're all terrorists. And, we're going to ethnically cleanse and, deal with the quote, we have the final solution to the Palestinian problem, and it's a Muslim problem. They're all ISIS, and even the children are ISIS. So, I mean, I'm being crass and crude in the commentary, but I actually have
being correct.
But we've reposted these exact words from Israeli officials, members of the Knesset, leading Zionist activists in Israel and outside of Israel, saying more or less the same thing. So it is unbelievable. And so if he adopts this position, and he's claiming it's because he's a champion of journalists, he picked the wrong person with Tommy Robinson. Tommy Robinson is widely regarded as a con man and a race hustler.
Well, look, I tell you this: somebody who can't even tell you their own name should always be looked at as, with a certain degree of suspicion. Meaning, if you can't give me your straight name when we're having a conversation, you give me a stage name, then I'm going to think you're an actor.
Yeah, it's common. It's common. People, you see this in other areas as well. I mean, yeah, if he was a great author, intellectual philosopher, or he had a great nom de plume career as a journalist in, with a newspaper column, or best-selling author or something like that, someone brilliant, then you could see, okay, yeah, there's a place for a nom de plume, and there's a precedent for that. But he's not. He's a political agitator.
Right.
So he's used that to shield his true identity so that he could move about and do things that other people can't. And so it protects him. It's protected him on many levels. But it also just shows the disingenuousness of the whole Tommy phenomenon. So Tommy Robinson clearly is more self-interested in his personal self-interest of survival, because he's got himself into such a bind.
So is Elon Musk, though. Like, I mean, from my point of view, propaganda is just what it is, right? I mean, oftentimes people would give these large ideas about what they actually are, about what they're actually doing. When really, if there's another reason that they're doing it, this is just the kind of the spokesperson for it. Musk, yeah, I agree with you. The Musk did a benefit by outing the Twitter files, where people could see what was taking place behind the scenes and how far their government was involved in either killing certain speech, shadow branding other speech, and even speech that was true. Like RFK, some of the stuff that he got put into a category of malinformation, information that was true. It was just not in the interest of the US government for him to say it. And so, agreed. But let's be also straightforward, right? That Musk is looking out for his own self-interest, whether it's with the H-1B1 visa thing, whether
Yeah.
it's with using Twitter as an app. And it's weirder because it's not like Jeff Bezos on the Washington Post doesn't come out with articles from Jeff Bezos in the Washington Post constantly.
I know.
Yeah,
And
Elon Musk does.
if he did, it would be ridiculous, wouldn't it?
It'd be outrageous, but Elon Musk does.
Yeah.
That's exactly what Musk does on his platform. Any random day, Musk has something to say, and you don't have any choice but to hear it.
And what he's done in this case is he is basically wielding an old trope, which is that the brown people are invading and
Yep.
raping our women, basically. So when you the whole grooming gang story, I mean, of course, systemized sexual abuse and gangs and organized pedophilia and all that. Of course, this is an issue in all countries. And some countries have a worse problem than others, and it's institutional. It goes right up to the highest levels of power as well.
Yeah.
This is a proven fact. So, but when this issue is weaponized to become a racial issue, this has been done over millennia. Is how you demonize another country, and you create a narrative. So, in Britain, for instance, if you actually look at the statistics. And who can you blame? The Quilliam Foundation, very dodgy think tank that put out this grooming gang report that said this were irrefutable facts when in fact they weren't. This has been widely debunked already. Then the Times, Rupert Murdoch's Times of London, I think it might have been before even Murdoch bought it, but after maybe. But they put out this report to give this impression, extreme right-wing type viewpoint of the problem, when in fact the majority of sexual abuse cases, according to the police, are of course, and grooming gangs are white.
Well, the majority of people there are white.
The perpetrators are white, and the victims aren't all white either. It's mixed, but overwhelmingly white. So what you have is, if there's a crime like this that's particularly egregious in this kind of system, information ecosystem, if it's an individual perpetrator, they usually focus on the individual if it's a white perpetrator. If it's a brown or a Muslim or a Pakistani, they'll collectivize the problem and say this is the group doing it. You see, so but demonizing the whole swath of an ethnic group, and this is not new. This is look at the way, and this is interesting because it fits the Israeli treatment of the Palestinians. October 7th, they beheaded babies. There was mass rape. These have all been thoroughly as total lies.
Yeah.
But what did they motivate? They motivated the worst genocide of our generation done in real time. Like, it was based on those lies. That's how the IDF motivated their pilots.
And by the way, people like
bomb civilian neighborhoods by reinforcing this idea. This has been shown to the way they propagandize their own conscripts and soldiers. Look, they've raped us. They've beheaded our babies. They'll take these lies and they're used to motivate soldiers to kill innocent civilians. This is the most horrific chain of events and misinformation that you could ever, but this is how it's done in history. There's never been a genocide in history that hasn't been based on a whole bevy of lies.
And the people who point them out get in trouble for doing so. What is it? Breonna Joy Gray, she gets axed from her job because she's being very aggressive on the issue and pushing back on it. I got reprimanded for pointing out that this story was fake, that there wasn't any rapes, that they couldn't necessarily prove and show it. And the company flipped out at the point where I pointed that out on air. Like, the people who were pushing back on this got heat for pushing back on it, even though there was no evidence for it at all. And now, like, you get even the New York Times coming out saying this was nonsense, that they weren't able to demonstrate even one person who got raped like that. I mean, it's just astonishing. And you're right. They ran with that. I mean, Piers Morgan recently, oh God, who did he have on? Was it Candace Owens or Francisco Albanese, I believe? And she points out, like, dude, you ran with this also. And he's like, no, I didn't. No, I didn't. And then in which case you played a video with him running along with the story about raping babies and all this other stuff.
Joe Biden ran with it.
Yes, he did.
It went to the level of the president of the United States repeating a lie and a trope to basically justify one of the worst war crimes in history. I mean, it doesn't get any worse than this. This is like, and they've used this to basically destroy the whole post-World War II international institution, Human Rights Convention, Geneva Convention, Genocide Convention.
Yep.
Hundreds of UN resolutions have all been thrown in the bin on the back of these half a dozen lies.
So true.
We've dismantled Western civilization. For what? Because fear and hate. And this should be the lesson, right? Because when we're growing up, that was the old joke, isn't it? When you get out of school in America or the US, how could the Holocaust have happened in Germany? Like, it's insane. All this stuff happened in space of 10 years. How is that possible? Well, there's answers to those questions.
Yep.
And if we're not learning the lessons in the present moment, in this time in history, 2024, right? And we can't learn those lessons when they're being demonstrated to us right to our face. And so then I would say we've failed as a society, and even further, if we've dismantled these institutions that were designed to prevent the worst possible crimes, then we failed as a civilization. Western civilization has failed. So if Western civilization has failed, then you have people like Elon Musk who are throwing gasoline on the fire on the same issue, and basically further eroding Western civilization institutions, trying to damage political parties and institutions, attacking governments in defense of Israel, or in defense of Tommy Robinson, whose main mission is racial division, hate, spreading fear amongst people from different backgrounds, and getting people to fear and hate each other. That is his job. And really, this is what a lot of these things in history that we want to avoid. These are the seeds that they grow from.
Agreed.
And that's me. I'm ostensibly kind of on the right side of the political paradigm. I'm more of a conservative, regarded by my peers or whatnot on issues. But I mean, I was born and raised as a Christian. Baptized as a Roman Catholic, went to Catholic Sunday education and so forth through my whole life. I don't staunchly identify as a Christian. It's just something part of my life. But I'm looking at the way things are unfolding now, and I'm looking at people that they politically identify as white Christian or Christian, and yet they're adopting all these genocidal policies and backing these genocidal policies. So there's a disconnect, and I think this goes to the core of some of the failure that we're having right now in terms of our government institutions, and so forth.
By the way, I agree with you on this. I would say that Musk, I guess from my point of view, Musk is a capitalist, and from that framing of things, government tends to be the only hedge for a capitalistic system, especially a rapacious one. I think Musk is looking out for his own interests. Meaning what the people like Musk, like Vivek, Donald Trump, there's a brain trust of thought associated with the way that these guys are going to operate and that they're going to act. And governments, I don't think they care that much about them, especially Musk.
100%.
The way he's been going after all of these governments.
Well, Jamal, that makes just quickly, that makes perfect sense, because this is why he's bought his way into the Trump White House. He's looking after his own interests. If this had been if the Democrat had been in the ascendancy, I don't think he would have taken these extreme positions to overcompensate to make it look like he has right wing bona fides. He's not very conservative. He's more of a sort of, he operates more like a rabid neoliberal than he does a conservative. So he's out trying to start trouble, more like a Trotskyite, more like a sort of radical Bolshevik, and regime change sort of advocate, which he was advocating for regime change in Venezuela after the last elections. I mean, that's Samantha Power. That's radical, neocon.
But Libya also, by the way, we were talking about the lithium, and it's like, hey, sucks for you that you're under all that lithium.
Yeah. So he's looking after his own interests. So he's bought his position there. He himself is a huge beneficiary of federal government contracts. He is rich. He's the richest man in the world because of the U.S. federal government.
Yeah.
Period. And he's the most widely regarded and successful and visible face of business, SpaceX, Tesla, all these beneficiaries of the federal government. So he knows where to park his business to benefit the most from public funds, you see. So he has to be in there. Peter Thiel has to be in there. They have Alex Karp from Palantir. They have to be in the inner circle because their future is an automated future. The future they want for us is a fully automated future, a fourth industrial revolution, a robotic driven future, a big data mining future, where we're just basically users. Eventually, Musk wants to replace workers with robots. No one's talking about that. He's not only on board with Klaus Schwab in the World Economic Forum. He is the main driver of Schwab's fourth industrial revolution. Elon Musk and his cohort are. So they want to transform the Department of Defense into an AI-led Department of Defense in the 21st century. They want to be at the center of that. But that goes with all of the social control and social management tools that are going to come with that, the UBI, the CBDCs, everything. So no one's talking about that. So he's in there in that pole position on behalf of the interests that have made him the most wealthy man in the world. He didn't do that on his own sort of didn't wave his own magic wand and make himself that. There are powerful interests that are backing the agenda that he is backing, that he is pushing forward. So he's positioned himself with Trump. So if you have the guy who bought his way into the White House, who's in charge of the biggest social media platform, pushing an extreme right-wing, divisive, hateful, fearful agenda via his, along with the most powerful foreign lobby in the world, which is the Israeli lobby in the United States. And he's doing this overtly. And so people are sitting back, like you said, he's pushing the stories like Jeff Bezos would if he was the owner of the Washington Post. Byline Jeff Bezos, front page of the Washington Post, every freaking day. It would just be silly, right? So and Jeff Bezos would become a character of derision, but because
cartoonish,
because credibility in Elon Musk and the technocrats world is based on social currency, based on social media clout. Followers and subscribers are the main metric of credibility now, not the integrity of the information that's being presented, but the quantity. So Elon Musk recognizes quantity, but not quality. And you can tell that by the people that he retweets. The accounts that he retweets are the biggest fake news producers on the platform. And
he gets it wrong.
And he said, we are the media. We're the media. And he's constantly touting that X is the #1 news source in the world. But he's talking about quantity of statistics of engagement and traffic. And what he's not telling you is that because of him, because he has made an algorithm that penalizes people for putting an external source link to his story in the tweet, then he is incentivizing a fake news tsunami on Twitter. And he's paying the biggest fake news producers through X monetization thousands of dollars a month to promulgate these completely unsourced fake stories, and it's turned it into a meme culture. So it's like it no longer is this sort of academic rigor of being able to source work and make sure that there's a line of truth that can be a thread of truth that can be tracked. He's basically stripped that out. He's incentivizing bad behavior, fake news producing. He boosts all those fake news accounts, the top ones. Some of them are sock puppet accounts. You don't even know who's operating them. But because they're putting out a political line that he agrees with, he's intentionally boosted them to make them the biggest, most visible, and most profitable accounts on there. So it's all about quantity and not quality. So the end game here, and he tweeted it out just yesterday, and it's what I predicted and warned people about before. I said, there's a danger that this strategy of convoluting and flooding the information space with poor information, and then at that point, people don't even know what's real and what's not. Then your disinformation campaign has reached its pinnacle, and then you have a problem. The reaction is people are saying we can't trust anything on the platform, and the solution is an AI engine, which Elon Musk has created called Grok. And he just tweeted out yesterday. He said Grok is going to be become the main source of truth.
Basically, I define what's true.
Problem, reaction, solution.
Yeah.
And technocrat controls all of those three items in the Hegelian dialectic. So he's in full control. And there is this very uncomfortable overlap between technocracy and fascism.
Yes.
And the technocrat essentially, fundamentally, is a fascist.
The way they operate, right? This kind of organization.
But if we go by the Benito Mussolini's orthodox definition of fascism, it's corporativism
and private, right?
Merger of corporate and state interests. And so what has Elon Musk done? He's positioned himself to be the main beneficiary of the emergence of corporate and state interests. Doge. So this to me is just a circus act, which is just a distraction. It's a meme. The Department of Government Efficiency, it's not even a department. It's
just an advisory thing. But I mean, if you're looking at SpaceX, if you're looking at Blue Origin, if you're looking at the defense contractors, these things are a merger. I mean, Musk is sitting right there on the right hand of the president, influencing policy directly in a way that's going to interest him. And God, man, I got to get you back to have this kind of larger conversation, because you're right about the AI stuff. Like from their point of view, if I could pay a robot to do a job for 5 cents less, I will pay that robot to do the job for 5 cents less. And if you can get rid of all the taxi drivers and all the truck drivers, and you're putting in an automated system that can automatically go from point A to point B, and nobody has asked the question, okay, well, what are we going to do about all these jobs? Meaning you have, like, these are people who are now unemployed that can no longer buy the products that are being sold. Okay, what do you do about that? And you're talking about that like all across industry. And then they say, okay, well, what about a UBI? Like, it's like all of these things just kind of one after the next that you could kind of see society careening into that they're not necessarily talking about or even engaging. I want to have that conversation with you when I bring you back, man. I appreciated this. Thank you for this. Please.
No, thanks. Appreciate it, Jamal. Yeah, it's a big conversation. There's a lot more to unpack. So be happy to do it anytime.
Oh, man, I really do enjoy you and appreciate you coming on. This is Patrick Henningsen. He's a geopolitical analyst, journalist, and host of the SundayWire.com, former TNT Radio, critic of mainstream media, propaganda, and also 21st Century Wire. Check it out. There's a new article that's out talking about the predictions of the 2025 year. Thank you for this, Patrick, man. I definitely want to have you back.
It's my pleasure. Thanks, Jamal.
Alrighty. So we have come to the end of the show. Ran a little bit long with Patrick because I enjoyed the conversation. But I want to thank all of you for joining me. Oh, we have chats. This is G. Willis. Great coverage. Oh, thank you, G. Willis. I do my damnedest. And Carol Asserbom. Super sticker. Thank you, Carol. And thank you, G. Willis. Guys, I want to thank all of you. I want to thank all of my new members. We have several now. I often say you can be anywhere and you're here. So I appreciate you for being here. One last thing. I put out my chess thing. So I will be doing chess lessons. I've had 1 or 2 people show interest in it. So yes, I'm available. Yes, I'm open for it. Just hit me by email and we can set up a time frame. Also, I will be doing blitz nights. And so I'm thinking about doing that an hour or 2 every day to see what that looks like in regards to people joining. I don't exactly know when yet. It's probably going to be in the evenings. That's what I call it, blitz nights. But during the time frame, you can challenge me for games. Members will get a series of blitz games for free each month. Anybody else who's not a member, if you want to challenge, you can do so. I think it's like $3 for a 3-minute game. And we do it that way. I'm looking for ways as a fundraiser, a way to raise money for the channel. And I hate asking for it. And so I thought an exchange is more ideal. Not to mention I want to get back into doing chess anyway. And I used to enjoy doing chess nights here. So it's kind of a win-win. All right, but I'm going to end this. I'm going to say like it, share it, subscribe to it. I want to thank all of you for joining me for today. I want you guys to have a fantastic day. Tomorrow, I need to play by ear because I need to drive back up to back up to DC tomorrow. Maybe. I'm trying to figure out a way to get out of doing that. If I can find a way to get out of doing it, you will see me here tomorrow morning. If I cannot find a way to do it, I'll put a message out in the morning, let you know. But either way, I will be back on Wednesday. So tomorrow, play by ear. I will give an announcement if I can't do it and I have to drive in this weather back up to DC. But if I don't, you will see me here bright and early Tuesday morning. I think that's everything. All right, guys. I hope you are somewhere safe. I hope you're somewhere warm. And I hope you don't necessarily have to go out in this weather. But if you do, be safe, be careful. And I'll see you in the morning. You guys have a fantastic day. Jamal Thomas Morning Show. Signing off.